So Yurugu, what is Yurugu? What's it all about? Well, I'm going to go through because it's that normally, to be honest, I don't know if you're like me, but normally I skip prefaces and all that sort of stuff because normally it's like, oh yeah, I just want to get straight into it, But for this book, I was like, let me start from the beginning and read every single prefatory note in the book. And so the author's note right at the beginning tells us what Yurugu is all about. Yurugu obviously is not a word that, what's Yurugu? Who knows what that is? Unless you've read the book. She explains it on page, well, actually, what's the page number on here? It's hard. When they do that Latin page numbers thing at the beginning, it's kind of hard to know what page this is, but there's a page that's the author's note. And I might as well read this whole note. It's not even a page. It's like one paragraph. It says, this is explaining what that term Yurugu actually means and where it comes from. Quote, according to the Dogon people of Mali in West Africa, Amma, the creator, ordained that all created beings should be living manifestations of the fundamental universal principle of complementarity or twinness. This principle manifests itself as the wholeness which is created when female and male pairs join in all things. Interestingly, based on our previous book that we read, Oyeronke, Oyewumi, The Invention of Women. Such pairing establishes equilibrium, cooperation, balance, and harmony. Amma, this is the creator, therefore equipped each being with twin souls, both female and male at birth. But in one of these primordial placentas, the female soul did not wait for the full gestation period. Sorry, the male soul did not wait for the full gestation period to be born. This male being was known as Yurugu, and in parentheses it says Ogo, who arrogantly wishes to compete with Amma and to create a world better than that which Amma had created. With this fragmented placenta, he created Earth, but it could only be imperfect since he was incomplete, that is, born prematurely. Without his female twin soul, realizing that he was flawed and therefore deficient, Yurugu returned to Amma, seeking his complementary female self. But Amma had given his female soul away. Yurugu, forever incomplete, was doomed to perpetually search for the completeness that would never be his. The earth he had defiled in the act of self-creation was now inhabited by single-souled, impure, and incomplete beings like himself. Yurugu's descendants, all eternally deficient, originated in an incestuous act since he had procreated with his own placenta, the representation of his mother. So that's Yurugu. And I'm assuming, and maybe some of you guys can inform us, or I haven't got as far to know like where she says, right, Yurugu is these people or that people, I don't know, or she's assuming that these people are that people. My understanding is that she's going to argue that the European philosophical essence, the European worldview, is basically a manifestation of this Yurugu, this incomplete being, which is in kind of opposition to how the universe is supposed to be in order. So yeah, that's Yurugu. That is the definition of Yurugu. And what you'll see in this book, as she's going to explain, in this book, she will refer to many African scholars. She'll refer to many elements of African philosophical systems, cosmologies. That one's from West Africa, the Dogon. She refers to Kiswahili. So some of the terms we're going to look at in a minute, Asili, Utamawazo, and Utamaroho, are Kiswahili terms. And her whole point is that it's really important that we as African people use African words to define the reality that we're trying to understand, overstand, understand, and all that. So that's that. Then we have the dedication. And I love this dedication, which I'm going to read in its fullness. Again, it's only one page, and it's an important dedication. What I like about the early parts of the book is that Mama Marimba Ani puts herself in the context of the history of the universe, and particularly the history of the first people of the universe, which is us, African people. She puts herself in a very, very long trajectory going back to the beginnings of our existence here on this planet, which I like. But here's the dedication. It's like a kind of written in verse almost, and it says, "To my mother, Delphine Douglas Richards, and to my daughter, Delphine Jifa Atsufi Fumilayo Douglas Richards, in whom her spirit has been reborn. In the tradition of African ancestral commemoration, this book is dedicated to the Egun of the Ma'afa." Egun is ancestors, I know from our last book, because we talked about the Yoruba people. So Egun, the book is dedicated to the Egun of the Ma'afa, that is who the ancestors who have suffered through the Ma'afa, who trusted in us, their descendants, to carry out the victory for which they sacrificed so much. It is for all African people, therefore, who have fought for the simple truth, race first. And it is especially for those who do not understand the meaning of that truth. And this, I like this one in particular. For those Africans who would be seduced into the labyrinth of academia, this book was written to free your minds that your spirits might soar, and you would become warriors and fundi rather than professors of white power. It is for and to our youth who must believe in the power of their Africanness so that they will be able to destroy and to rebuild with African vision. So very, very clear. She, right from the start, she's like, listen, this book is all about African liberation. This book is all about attacking European thought. This book is all about equipping us to be able to do that task, to build a visionary, this is a visionary book. It's a destructive book in a sense, and it's a reconstructive or a transformative or a creative book in both in those both terms. And that, when she talks about those who would be bamboozled by academia, it makes me refer back to, first of all, in the last book, Oyewumi, Oyeronke, Oyewumi, she talked about how African studies, in her opinion, back then in the 90s, was very much orbiting around European thought. It was responding to European ideas. It was responding to, thinking in European terms, using European concepts and all that sort of stuff. And then Amilcar Cabral as well talked about how, the colonialists would handpick certain people from amongst the colonized and train them up in their philosophy and their academia and all that kind of stuff, so that they could send them back into their home countries and police the colonized people, basically. So that's what I'm thinking of when Marimba Ani is talking about those who would be bamboozled. And you know what? I would have loved to have, even just from the first 50 pages of this book that I've read so far, and from what I know about Mama Marimba Ani, I would have loved to have read this book before I went into uni, because I would have done a lot better in uni. It would have been a much more of a transformative experience for me, actually, being in university. So, and I'm sure some of you guys can probably relate to that as well. A lot of this learning that we do, the Pan-Africanism, the Black consciousness, the getting into some of these concepts and terms that we're going to talk about, even like ancestors and all this sort of stuff, that comes after uni. That comes for a lot of people after university, whereas really it should be coming from when you're young, like these youths here, So yeah, let's learn these things and let's filter them. Let's break them down into very simple terms to feed to our youngsters, the youth, them, the watoto, the babana, and all that. So now we move on to the introduction by Baba John Henrik Clarke. And John Henrik Clarke is someone who you can find lots of lectures, again, on YouTube. PDF. Everything is Politics said you want a PDF. I mean, you could just Google it, fam. But I'm joking. Let me just have a quick look here. Yurugu PDF. Which one was the one I used? I think it's not that one. The one thing, the PDF is not the best PDF you'll ever come across, because you can't search that. Anyway, you'll see. I've put a link in the comments there to the actual PDF thing. So if you can just copy and paste that, that'll be all good. It's like I said, it's not a great PDF. Makes sense because it's 600 pages long. So whoever photocopied it, probably didn't really have time to be doing it, for example, every single page individually, and then the time it was when it was done, probably wasn't as advanced as PDF technology is now. So in comparison to the Oyeronke Oyewumi PDF, which when you could search by terms, you could copy and paste all that sort of stuff out of it. You can't do that with this one. So yeah, I do recommend getting the actual physical book if you can. So John Henrik Clarke is, yeah, it took a while. Finding the PDF did take me a while, but I'm used to going down these little rabbit holes and finding like niche, dodgy websites. Often you click on this website, you think, is this going to download a virus to my computer? But I seem to have escaped with this one so far. So yeah, the introduction by John Henrik Clarke. John Henrik Clarke is somebody just like Mama Marimba Ani and many of these people, Yosef Ben Yochanan. We hear a lot about them. You know, they're often referred to like in passing. Oh yeah, John Henrik Clarke, Dr. Ben, Dr. Ben, Dr. this, Dr. that. But I've never read anything by him. Actually, I don't even know if he's written any book. Has he written books? I don't know. Maybe he's written books. I'm not actually sure if he's written any books or anything like that. So this is actually the first thing of any length that I've ever read from him, and it was quite an interesting read actually. It's only 3 pages, and what he does, he gives an overview. He gives his overview of the book, glowing praise for Marimba Ani first of all. And they have a very close relationship. And what you learn from her introduction in a minute is that Dr. John Henrik Clarke was a formative, critical, primary influence on her and continued to be a mentor for her throughout the time of her writing this book. I'll read the first paragraph. He says, in this book, Professor Donna Richards, Marimba Ani, has opened up a Pandora's box called racism that will not be easily closed by the creators of racism or its victims. What she is saying will have to be seriously considered if the reader of her words is ever to know peace. This, and this is important for me, this is a pioneering and groundbreaking work dealing with a neglected aspect of European culture. Most books about Europeans deal mainly with what Europeans think of other people. In this book, Professor Richards has analysed the European influence on the world based on what they think of themselves and how this thought affects most of the world. So that's why I selected this book eventually to read. It was because I think that's what we need to do in order to understand our predicament as Africans and others in this world. Even as Europeans who don't buy into this whole, this whole system, this whole demonical system of capitalism, white supremacy, and all that sort of stuff, it's important that we understand the roots of where this system came from in the first place. And it's important to get into the heads of the oppressor. It's important to get into the minds of the oppressor to understand where they're coming from. And that's just in the first 30 pages of this book that I've read, the 40 pages of this book, it really does do that. She really does start to lay out some foundations and go to the source of where some of these arguments and these ideas come from. So that's very, very important point that, yes, Paul Morris said that we must deconstruct and analyze and critique them. Yes, absolutely. It's not enough to just, it's important to talk about the manifestations of their worldview. Yes, it's important to talk about, say, anti-Black violence in its various forms. It's important to talk about colonialism, neo-colonialism, imperialism, whatever else you might want to call it, statism, I would say. Yes, that's very, very important to talk about the manifestations. And yes, we need to do all of that sort of stuff, talk about the events, the news and all that sort of stuff. But if, and this is the point she makes, so I'm not going to belabor it, but if you're just looking at all of these events all the time and saying, oh my God, another Black man has been shot and killed. Oh my God, another Black sister has been, raped and murdered. If all you're ever doing is that, jumping from crisis to crisis to crisis, then yes, you're just going to end up with depression, not understanding how it all kind of fits together. And that's what's important for this, is like, so that as soon as something happens, you can be like, cool, well, okay, here's a framework I've got here, and I get it. Yeah, they keep killing our brothers and sisters, you know, our women keep dying in childbirth at much higher rates than other people. The reason that happens is because the European worldview positions us as being X, Y, Z, and so they see it. You know what I mean? You can put it into a framework so that nothing sort of shocks or surprises you, which is important because you can be shocked. You can be so shocked all the time about everything that's happening to a point of bewilderment, and then you're just kind of stuck, not knowing what to do. So, very important for us to do this. John Henrik Clarke then talks about the ideology. He emphasizes, or he highlights the fact that, and I'm going to read this bit. Actually, I won't read the majority of the book, the introduction, but he emphasizes the fact that I'll read this here. He says, I have referred to this, so this is okay, let me read the first couple of paragraphs. Without saying it, she, i.e. Marimba Ani, has emphasized that for the last 500 years, the world has been controlled by a form of European nationalism. They have created a concept called the cultural other that has influenced their vision of themselves and other people in their contact with Africans, Asians, and people of the Pacific Islands, interestingly. They have declared most things primitive that they could not understand. They have laughed at the gods of other people. This cruelty was compounded when, through propaganda and the misuse of the Bible, note that, they taught other people to laugh at their chosen gods and adopt the god of their conqueror. And ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth? You know, if you can find amongst a gathering of African people anywhere in the world, if you can find more than a handful out of every 100 who can even A, name any of our deities, but B, who would have anything but scorn and disdain and fear with regard to those deities, divinities, if you want to, whatever you want to call them, I'll be impressed, because I certainly didn't hear any of these till I was grown up. Till not that long ago, I had no idea about the Orishas, about even East African names for the Most High God. I had no idea of any of that sort of stuff. And so, yeah, that he's absolutely right on that. Then going back to then this is what I was going to bring up, was his quote when he says, "I have referred to this as the manifestation of the evil genius of Europe. They were the last branch of the human family to emerge into that arena called civilization. In their conquest of the minds of most of mankind, they have been able to convince themselves and others that they were indispensable to civilization, and without them it would not have, and that without them it would not have existed." And then, so that's the evil genius, this amazing trick, this amazing work that's been done by the European world to convince themselves and everybody else that they are the center, and they always have been the center of the world, and that they're the ones who created civilization. And of course, that term civilization needs delving into and unpacking, because what is civilization, for crying out loud? If civilization means living in towns and cities and not foraging and not being hunter-gatherers and being literate and all that, I'd have to disagree. Oh, if that's what civilization is, you know what? There's a Still Pulse song, I think I talked about it last time, called Soldiers. And he's in this song, he's talking about part of this song. It says, talking about bodies scarred beyond recognition, bodies bruised and battered, talking about colonialism, our encounter with colonialism. And then he says something like, "If this is what civilization means to me, then without it, I would prefer to be." And ain't that the truth? If this is civilization, yeah, maybe I can give or take it. But anyway, the point is that the Europeans have positioned themselves as being like the leaders of the world, the leaders of humanity, and they've convinced us that they are humanity. Whatever it is that they say about humanity and existence and the universe that just is what is. So, for example, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about gender, and the idea of men, the idea of men going out and doing certain kinds of things, and women staying at home, and women not being leaders, women this, women that, being oppressed. And he was like, yeah, but it's kind of always been like that, hasn't it? And I was like, no, it hasn't, because I've read Oyeronke, Oyewumi. I was like, maybe in this country, I don't know, maybe it has in Britain, but it wasn't like that in amongst the Yoruba. And I'm sure it wasn't like that amongst any other people. But that making that point, you might as well be trying to convince someone that white is black, because they're like, no. But this is just it. This is just because you're taught to assume that the journey of the European through world history is the journey of the human through world history, you know. And it's that's the trick. That's the genius of the Europeans, that they've managed to do that. And you know what? Well done to them. That Kabaka Pyramid has got that song, well done. You know, and he's sarcastically clapping and praising the politicians for stealing and thieving and looting and all that sort of stuff, and still managing to get themselves elected. Well done to the Europeans, man, in that sense, the evil geniuses that they are. So John Henrik Clarke then says, there's something that he said, which he said, I can't find the quote, but yeah, that's it. Yeah. All right, I'll read it in a second. But yeah, anyway, so he's talking about that. The idea, the key is to understand that they would not have been able to do this just by military means alone. It's got to have been done by capturing the minds of their victims. So he says something quite interesting here about race. He says that prior to the period that I'm referring to, the people of the world were not referred to by their color. Therefore, the concept of a white people is a creation. The same is true of black people, of yellow people, and brown people. The concept of race that now plagues the whole world is an artificial European invention. Professor Ashley Montague has referred to it as man's greatest myth. While the world, so that's, you know what, that you don't hear that very often amongst our circles. And this is what I mean, what I was trying to get at earlier, is that people refer to John Henrik Clarke, people refer to these people, but whenever I read these people, I'm like, well, I mean, the stuff that some of these other people talk about in their own political ideology and so forth, I don't often hear some of these things that they're, you know, great warrior scholars, master teachers kind of talk about. John Henrik Clarke is saying there that race is a myth in black and white. Race is a myth, and it is a myth. It's absolutely a myth. Race is a construct, is a social construct, is an ideological construct that does not, you know, that it does not conform to reality. You know, we are not races of people, really. We are not. You know, if you're going to look, however you want to define it, by what's the word? By phenotype, well, it's fairly obvious that you can get people who are white and quote unquote considered white in some countries, and then they're considered black in another country. If you're going by genetics, then the famous point that genetic diversity is actually wider amongst black people in Africa, much wider. So there's much more genetic distance between, say, a person, a Khoisan and a Berber, or a Khoisan and a Bantu, or a you know, the genetic diversity amongst us is much wider than it is the genetic diversity between Africans and Europeans and so forth. So that's fairly evident. Race certainly is a myth, and it's important to kind of break that down. However, as John Henrik Clarke kind of says very clearly, while the word race and the concepts around it are artificial, the effects of its creation are real. The application of this concept has affected the lives of most of the people of the world. It was part of the basis of the slave trade and of the colonial system that followed. So that's an important point. And one of the vibes I get from this book. So here's another section here that he says. He talks a lot about the people of Africa, Asia, and other places. And what I get from him, actually, and I was surprised by this, I thought that he would just be like, black people this, black people that, only black people, Africans. But he very much is sort of hinting at what you might call third world solidarity, global South solidarity, or something on those lines. Because he says, So I'll quote this last bit. He says this, Professor Richards in her book asks this revealing question: what is the relationship between the way in which Europeans conceive of the world and the way in which they relate to the majority peoples? To put it another way, what is the relationship between the dominant modes of European thought and the dominant modes of their behavior towards others? And then Baba John Henrik Clarke says, if the people in Africa and Asia and the former European colonies are to emerge into full independence, statehood, and world responsibility, they will have to answer the above question creatively and in their favor. Thus, then, in a collective sense, they will have to participate with others in a world that can be free, that can recognize European influence without accepting European dominance. And isn't that great? Isn't that great? That's like I said, he's saying, listen, the black struggle, the struggle of African people that we have is part of the same struggle that other people have, interestingly, and so he's saying he's, and I find that you could say that's quite practical, because he's not just saying, look, we as black people just need to do it all on our own and just create our own little corner of the world where we can just be ourselves and just black. He's thinking in terms of the world. How's the world going to fit together without being dominated by the European and so forth? So that's an important point. And then he ends up by saying, he makes that point that, listen, if the Europeans could never have dominated the world through just arms, just violence, they had to control our minds. And I've said that point already. So that's John Henrik Clarke's introduction. And then we get into an incantation. So again, please make sure that you like the video, please, and share it. If you would like to share the video, that'd be really good. Share the video so that more people can jump on board, and we can do this thing. I'm also scrolling along across the screen there. That is if you could please sign up to the email list there at eliwananda.substack.com. That would be much appreciated. So yeah, that was John Henrik Clarke. What did he just say? My son's saying something or another. But so exactly, it is unfortunate that anti-blackness governs the psyche of the world. That's right. And one of there's some questions there, aren't there? Which such as did that anti-black did the rest of the world get that anti-blackness from the Europeans, or did they all share in this anti-blackness? And also, if they all share in this anti-blackness, where does that anti-blackness come from then? What's the history of that? I'm inclined to, what's my thought on that? I think that I'm inclined to think that it is a European / Eurasian thing, as in, I see elements of anti-blackness in Islamic thought, Arab thought, pre-Islamic Arab thought to an extent, and certainly pre-Christian European thought going back quite a bit. So I'd imagine it does come mainly from the Europeans, but that's something that we need to dig into. So then we have an incantation. And I'm going to read this incantation because it's very powerful. So this incantation is, she says, Marimba Ani says, taught to her by Kwame Kwei-Armah and Kobe Kambon. And you'll see that she keeps referring to Kwame Kwei-Armah. And one of the books that is on my radar of books to maybe do in future is 2000 Seasons by Kwame Kwei-Armah. And this incantation starts with 2000 seasons of restless sleep beneath the destroyer's fragmented image. We used their definitions of ourselves to disconnect our consciousness. Lines drawn in denial of deeply textured souls. Okra, ka, se, life, force, energy, nyama. They knew, even as we slept, that our spirit was more powerful than their white death. In our will-less sleep, we have allowed the earth to be defiled. The wake of 2000 seasons of spiritless matter, destroyers' work. Confusion in Ma'afa aftermath. Within our lost knowledge, enemies have blurred the line between us and them. Are we destroyers ourselves? No, we are the spring water, compelled by ancestral consciousness, Egun, Nsamanfo, issuing from Ani's womb, we divine a victorious destiny, Ifa or Du. We are awakening, announcing ourselves, self-determining with Nubian will, crystal vision, shaping a new reality. Ancient genius rediscovered, so Dai, the clear word. Balancing the scales, restoring spirit to matter, the whole completed, made cosmic again. Rhythm is the key to the way. Alienating death with life, joining us to each other. We are the healers. The victory is ours. We call upon Onyame, Oludumare, and Ama, invoking the Nomo power of blackness, carried in the genes of race memory. Hesse, ancestors and children to be born, keys to the circles of connectedness and clarity. Africa redeemed, the universe in harmony, return and move forward to the way of a natural order, African world order, resplendent reflection of Ma'at. Ashe. Ashe, ashe, ashe. Yeah, wow, powerful. So, and there's a lot in there as well. Like as we go into the rest of this book, you'll see that there's a lot in that incantation that is actually what we're talking about in this book. Particularly, you know, there's spiritless matter is going to be the thing that we're going to probably focus on mostly in this topic, and dichotomizing, separating ourselves from one another, separating ourselves from the universe, and so forth. And also, she makes the incantation talks about divining a future. It talks about Ifa. That's talking about epistemology, isn't it? How do we learn? How do we apprehend knowledge? How do we apprehend truth? We need to, you know, we do it through our own means. We don't apprehend knowledge through the means given to us by others, given to us by the Europeans or Arabs or whoever it might be. So wonderful incantations, wonderful incantation there. So yeah, enough respect to everyone. We're going to go into the acknowledgement in a minute, but I want to just check on the comments here. There's a couple there have come in, and also encourage everybody to like the video, please, and share the video, please. Paul Morris said that in European is not indigenous. Would you like to explain what you mean by that, please, my brother? And then Desaline says, do Arabs and other non-Africans have a history of living among Africans and not trying to dominate them? I don't think so, you know. I mean, from my reading, all I see is... So, for example, I mean, what's the oldest ones you could probably think of in recorded? Obviously, we're talking about recorded history. There may well be things before history started being written down, but all I see, if you're talking about the so-called Hyksos being one of the earliest interlopers into Kemet in the was that around 2000 BC or something like that, and they came to conquer, they came to rule, they came to, you know, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, my knowledge and my history of that. One of the things I really want to study is the history of the Sahel, the history of North Africa, if you want to call it, because it's a desert now. The Sahara is a desert now, and so, you know, it's just a desert mainly. But the Sahara was not always a desert. The Sahara was once, as you can see by rock paintings and stuff, and history, you know, histories of people and so forth. There was once a time when that was a very fertile part of the world, and you know, by the time you get to, say, when the Greeks came, like 200 BCE, 300 BCE, and started spreading out into that area, and then, you know, around about that time as well, the Visigoths, all these Europeans, basically, these people, these Germanic peoples, mainly Germans, really, Visigoths, Vandals, all these peoples who came in and settled there and whatnot. My understanding is that was a period, that was a process of conquering. And then, of course, you have the Romans who came, you know, trying to conquer. And then, of course, you have the Muslims, who were the most successful conquerors in that part of Africa. Although, once again, shout out to the ancestors of Dongola, who checked the progress of the caliphate coming down the River Nile. They stopped them twice, 2 battles. They whooped their asses and enabled what is now East Africa to remain un-Islamized on the whole. So yeah, peace and love to you. Peace. Peace says peace and love. All right, let's get into this. So the acknowledgement. This is on. We're still on Roman numerals, I'm afraid. So no page numbers here. Oh, actually, what's this? This is Roman numerals. I'm not going to bother with that. So she gives some acknowledgements here, and like I said, she puts herself. Marimba Ani puts herself in a context of a long period of African history and struggle. Starts off though with "To whom praises and thanks are due. I live close." This is quoting Marimba Ani. "I live close to my ancestors, and most particularly to my mother. I thank them every day for the blessings that they continually bestow. My responsibility to them is what this book is about. It helps to fulfill the oath that I took by having been born African to avenge their spirits. I acknowledge them here for giving me life, for my connection to the universe, the universal life force, and for being my collective consciousness, and for the spirituality with which I think." And it's really important. I forgot my sage. It's a shame, but it's really important to be. Our ancestors are so important, and one of the things that this book we're going to grapple with is the idea that the ancestors are not a thing, because obviously in the European worldview or the materialistic worldview, once you're dead, you're dead. You're dead and gone. That's it, finished. But that's a trap. If you go down that route, that's a trap to think in that way, to see the world in that way. And it's a trap because it fragments our community. Our community is not just I and I, you and me and whatever. Our community is those who are unborn, includes those who are unborn, and also includes those who have been and gone. They still exist. They're in a different realm. They're in a different form of existence, but they still exist. And we can't allow ourselves to. We should be focused. I need to be much more focused on my ancestors, wherever it be. Just she's got a really good lecture. Marimba Ani has got a really good lecture about the ancestors, which I suggest you go and check out at some point. Not now, but check that out. So she's really important. It's really important that she puts herself into the context of the ancestors. That's the whole point of this book and the whole point of my work. I think she's verbalizing something that I've thought for a long time, that all this stuff that I do online, I'm not doing it for money. It doesn't pay me any, it doesn't bring any money to me. It's not, what I mean? It's a hobby. You could call it a hobby if you just look at it. If you're just thinking there's work, and then there's hobby, pastimes, it's a hobby. But for me, this stuff, the hobby of doing this reading and this work that we're doing, this is the important stuff. This is the stuff that when I'm gone, my children will look at and say, listen, this is the stuff that will be the foundationals. This is the stuff that's going to last centuries and will be, it connects me with the ancestors and the struggles that they went through and the magnificence of the achievements that they had. This connects us with that. So, that's Wagwan here. Good point. Everything is Politics says, we've come such a long way. The fact that we are still walking the surface of this earth is truly a manifestation of how deeply we're loved by the source. Yes, I are. Even if these people wanted to destroy us, they couldn't do it. They could not do it. And I don't think they want to. Actually, this is one of the learnings I've got from Afro-pessimism is that I don't think they really want to destroy us. They just want to have us there, always under their foot, And everything that we've gone through, though, you think about just the fact that we have people, you guys who are in the United States, you guys who are in the Caribbean, just the mere fact that you guys exist, and just the mere fact that you are in many ways leading the Black world is an absolute tribute to the longevity of our people and the fact that that something is on our side in some way, shape, or form, whether it be we want to call it God or the universe or whatever, So there we go. All right. So she gives praise to the ancestors. Let me just look at my notes here. She says that Yeah, the whole point of these acknowledgements is to put her in that tradition, and then she says a couple of really interesting little nuggets of information. So she says, as I mentioned before, quote, "I owe my awakening and growth towards a Pan-African nationalist consciousness to Professor John Henrik Clarke, who allowed some of us as young people who worked with SNCC to literally sit at his feet in his Brooklyn apartment in 1965 to 66 and drink of his wisdom and knowledge concerning the history of the Pan-African world. This close contact with Professor Clarke tapped my African center, and I developed a passion for the realization of the Pan-African vision." And there's two things that jump out at me, two things I want to say about that. One is that, isn't it so important it's so important to recognize that, all right, Marimba Ani wrote this book in 1994. The book found its beginnings 30 years before. This wasn't 84, 90. Yeah, 30 years previously. She's saying, listen, her foundational period was 30 years previously, where she, you know what I mean? She sat under the great John Henrik Clarke and learned from the great John Henrik Clarke. I saw a comment on one of Marimba Ani's lectures where someone was saying, yeah, but is she like, what's, you know, is she in line with John Henrik Clarke and these guys? I mean, what is what she's saying? Does that match up with what they're saying? And then someone pointed out that she literally comes directly under, you know, she comes directly out of John Henrik Clarke's teachings, not even just on a book level, but on a personal level. She knew John Henrik Clarke. She learned under John Henrik Clarke, you know. So we're standing on the shoulders of giants is the important thing to say. She goes on to say that in 1975, she says, Professor Clarke was later to come back into my life as a mentoring force. When I finished graduate school in 1975, he brought me into the Department of Black and Puerto Rican Studies in Hunter College. He then advised me to write articles on aspects of my analysis and helped me to get them published. This is beautiful, man. Perhaps more than any single person in the African world community, Professor John Henrik Clarke has stimulated young people of African descent to search for an African-centered truth. I take this opportunity to express my love and gratitude and to acknowledge the genius of this master teacher, this molder of minds. For a great teacher is one who can point in his sunset years to hundreds of younger African people who owe their ideological commitment and political development to their inspiration. Asheo. And that's that's just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Give flowers to the ancestors. Give flowers to them when they're still alive as well, you know. Oh, I'm coming to that comment also for Griot in a second. Oh, that makes me so happy. Yeah, so it's so important. Give the flower. And sorry, the other point I was saying, sorry, is that Marimba Ani evidently isn't just some person who just you know, she just popped on the scene and started making YouTube videos like me. This is a mama elder teacher who was involved with SNCC. What's it? Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. SNCC, 1965-66. Those were the times when Stokely Carmichael, as he was known then, was still there. Obviously, Malcolm X, ML Martin Luther King. All these, you know, her political consciousness was forged in that period of time. There, I'd love to hear some more biographical work, actually, biographical information about Marimba Ani, because what does that show you? That shows you that, you know, and I'm sure all of these people that we're reading about, they could tell you the same thing. That listen. Here's where I come from. I come from 30 years of organizing. I come from the traditions. And obviously, when you connect yourself with SNCC, you're also connecting yourself with all of the threads that went into the formation of SNCC, going right the way back. I mean, I say right the way back, goes back to the Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, whoever it might be, Toussaint Louverture, Cécile Fatiman, and all, you know, all of these trends, all of these threads of our struggle, of our history, of what went into forming her Marimba Ani's political consciousness, which then have brought Yurugu to our lives here. So we give thanks, we give honor and praise to all of those who came before us. So yeah, that's all good. And then she said she also gives, I should say as well, she also gives a lot of love to Molefi Kente Asante, is that his name? Yeah, who wrote Afrocentrism. Very, very, very pivotal book. That was a book when I was at uni. That was one of the only books I remember picking up and being like, oh, this is very black, and reading years and years ago. And basically, it says that one day, when he was visiting New York, he pulled out a dusty manuscript and began to read, i.e., then Marimba Ani says, I subsequently mailed more chapters to him. He read all 686 pages, writing comments in the margins. When he finished, he was enthusiastic, saying, Marimba, you must publish this. It was the first time that anyone had taken the time to read the entire work, and he made me believe in the necessity of its completion. Goodness me. Then she says, I rewrote every chapter. Goodness me. And then she says that, Professor Clark saying whenever I would see him, when are you going to finish that book? And you know why I love that? I love these little nuggets, because it's our elders are so important to us. I recall, for example, when I was in organizing more, I'm not at all now, but when I was in organizations 10 years ago or so, or a bit further back than that, starting a bit further back than that. And I was youngish guy, I'd come in, and honestly, depending on how the older people in that group would relate to me and treat me, would have a big impact on whether, definitely had a big impact on my longevity in those organizations. So for example, I remember being part of an organization where the women in particular, the aunties in particular, were so warm. They were so welcoming of me. They were so encouraging of me. They just were so loving. And that is what I needed as this single boy, young boy, do you know what I mean? Young man coming in and like, yeah, and they just took me under their wing and they were so supportive. And that's so important. If you know any younger people, even if it's people who are into music, art, whatever it might be, just please make sure you take the time to support them, encourage them, say nice things to them, be open to speak to them and give them advice and so forth. Because if it wasn't for Dr. John Henrik Clarke, if it wasn't for Molefi Kente Asante, and their encouragement of Marimba Ani, we probably wouldn't even be talking about this book now, because the book might not even exist. And then it makes me also think about the amount of our people who are now, even right now, and certainly in the past, but right now, have got wonderful ideas that they want to follow up on and build on, but maybe they don't know that anyone cares. They don't know that anyone would want to read the book that they might write. They don't know that anyone might even be interested in listening to the music that they want to compose, and so on and so forth. So just let's make sure that we're encouraging these youngsters, these young, and not even just youngsters, but just encouraging one another, so that we can have, so that we can be creating more and more foot soldiers for this war that we're in. So she goes on. She gives thanks to her family members. She gives thanks to there's one guy who let me read this. It says, it is to Herio Tabuto that I owe so much. He saved me when I did not know I would be able to get the manuscript typed. A pre-med student who could work on the computer, having written and published his own book at the age of 16, he processed the entire manuscript efficiently and with great care. It was a critical juncture for me. Harriet also gave me critical feedback on the ideas and concepts that it contained. I thank Nsamanfo for bringing this together. Oh, no, sorry, that wasn't the one. Oh, this is the one I wanted to. So, I mean, that's important, but this is the one I wanted to read. I thank Andre Norman for being patient enough to introduce me to the Macintosh, as he has done with so many of our people. That skill made my editing so much easier. I thank him for allowing me to invade his family's apartment for specific computer help that I needed. His is a nurturing spirit. So I like that, because my goodness me, Macintosh, maybe some of you don't even know what the hell that means. like maybe some of you, I mean, most of you do, but probably don't even know what Macintosh means. What she's talking about there is an Apple Macintosh, a Mac. We call them Mac now, MacBook, Mac this, Mac Pro, but they used to be called Apple. You know, they were first came onto the scene as Apple Macintoshes, and they were one of the first affordable, useful home computers in the 80s and 90s. I remember them. I remember when they were first coming into schools and that. And it's just those little things, like we're seeing the emotional and personal support, but also technological support. Technology is key. So, you know, I give thanks to someone who first told me about. I remember I was trying to work out how to live stream, and this sister was like, "Oh yeah, StreamYard, use StreamYard," and I've been using StreamYard for the last, you know, as a result for the last 3 years, 2-3 years. So, you know, we give thanks. We give thanks. So yeah, that was all I want to pull out from the acknowledgement. And then the next page is going to be the glossary, and then we're going to go into chapter 1. So peace out to everyone. Nice to see the comments kind of bubbling up nicely. Let's go through some of these comments here. Again, please do like the video, like up the ting, like the ting, Naman. Just put please like the ting. There, bit in there. Please like the ting, and then I'll just do that. Please like the ting now. So, shout out to the comments. Let's see. There's something I wanted to try touch on. Right. Oh, Paul Morris, as usual, getting deep. Paul said, "It is a well-held thought that through migration, Europeans came into being. Others profess DNA experimentation, others DNA defects. So when we are talking about race in terms of origins or indigenous people, well, there is only one group. We must contextualize our existence within nature. They are also our ancestors' nature." Yeah, Europeans can't. Right, okay. Oh, gosh. And the next comment. Oh, there's a couple more. "So there are many questions to ask of them and their psyche. This is why they are out of balance, Europeans." All righty. Yeah. Yeah, and that is when we go into chapter 1, that is one of the things that just kept coming into my head was, why, where, and why. And Marimba Ani, she talks about this. She kind of starts to say, like, speculate a little bit on where this worldview came from and why. You know, did it come from just Plato? Because she talks a lot about Plato, or was Plato just kind of, and this is what I think, Plato just kind of took a particular trend in existing thought amongst so-called Europeans and, you know, really ran with it. And one thing to point out as well is that this European, that concept of European is a new concept. The ancient Greeks would not have considered themselves to be Europeans. The ancient Romans wouldn't have considered themselves to be Europeans. I've got a book somewhere that basically points out that European term only came about. There was one of these goddesses called Europa, and I think it only really started to come into usage in like 300s or 400s or something like that. It was quite late on, you know. So sometimes it's just important to remember that, you know, the background behind some of these things. But yeah, all right, Paul. Right, Ted, you're bringing it to some, yeah. And I'm pretty sure as we go through the book, maybe we'll start to get a little bit more into some of these questions about that. And obviously, Marimba Ani, you know, by using the Yurugu as a term for the whole book and, you know, characterizing the Europeans, she seems to be leading in that direction of, you know, the origins of these people might not be the same as us, let's say. Osafo Grio, new name to me. Thank you for joining us here. Tuned in from Essex, England. All right, mate. Yeah, how's Essex? Essex. I'm from near Essex. I'm from Leighton in East London, so kind of just a little bit, you know, the first county that you get to. Leighton would have been in Essex till the 60s or something. But all right, peace to you. Listening to this with Shabaka Hutchings in the background, who steered me to Yurugu, probably through the so Shabaka Hutchings is I've only heard of him in the last literally 2 weeks, literally, and I'm kicking myself because he's in this group called the Sons of Kemet. For one, that's the first group I came across, but then he's the Shabaka and the Ancestors. The Ancestors is a jazz band from South Africa. I started listening to one of their concerts yesterday, and I was blown away. The double bassist did like a solo that was like, what is this guy on? And I said, funnily enough, I made a post on Facebook and YouTube where I basically said that I'm starting to get into, was it YouTube? Maybe not on YouTube. I'm starting to get into jazz for the first time really properly as a result of the Sons of Kemet. The Sons of Kemet have got a live show. It's called In the Basement. And it's just, there's 2 drums, Shabaka on saxophone and flute sometimes, and then there's a guy called Theon on tuba, doing the bass line on the tuba. And I've never seen that before. I didn't even know you could do that. And the dude's playing bass like he's actually playing the bass guitar, and it's just phenomenal. And I think that I think the reason I'm starting to be more open to, one of the reasons I'm being more open to jazz is because I'm starting to break out of some of the linearity of thinking and so forth, the linear aesthetics that we've adopted from the Europeans, which Marimba Ani is going to talk about. But yeah, I think Sons of Kemet have got a song called Let the Circle Be Unbroken, which is a title of one of Marimba Ani's books, funnily enough. So I presume that's what you mean, Osafo, when you talk about Shabaka led you to Yurugu. Tito District says, I've heard, responding to Paul, I've heard similar research saying the gene that presents as white skin only came about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. In the UK, they say the true indigenous people of that land were actually brown. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, genetics-wise, I don't think it's even a controversy that the people that we now consider to be white people are quite new. I mean, John Henrik Clarke said in the introduction that, you know, the Europeans are new on the scene of world history compared to everybody else. And that's important. That's important to remember, is that we're old. We are ancient people, man. Ancient, even just in our DNA. Do you know what I mean? In this, but also in our thinking, in our spirituality and all this sort of stuff. We're ancient people, right back to the start. One of the things we need to be careful of, I think, is that everyone is African thing, because everyone is not African. Africans are African. Europeans are not African. Do you know what I mean? They might have evolved from people, from us, you know, but they're not Africans. They're not Africans. We are Africans. Cool. All right. Yeah. Flowers to the ancestors. Most definitely. Tribute to the ancestors. Tribute to the martyrs. And ting and ting. A couple more comments here. Everything's Politics says, I don't think we're developing these qualities of erudite African scholars in this generation. I live for classical materials, grateful for all they've left with us. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Although I do see, so on Facebook, by the way, yeah, check me out on Facebook. Africans Arise, you can find me on. Am I called that? Anyway, if you search Eli Wananda or Africans Arise, you'll be able to find me on Facebook. I like to use the different social media platforms for different kinds of conversations. So Facebook's quite good for like getting into in-depth back and forths and stuff. But there's one guy I follow on Facebook who's often mentioning books by certain people who I've not heard of. But there probably are some out there, but they're just not very popular because, let's face it, people ain't trying to read books anymore these days on the whole. But I think Dr. Cambone is probably one that is probably on that level of scholarship. You know, what's his name? Cambone, Dr. Cambone. I can't remember what his first name is. My bad. And also Asa Imhotep, I believe his name is. He's another one. He's doing a lot of really good work. Thorough scholarship mainly on Kemet and linguistics and the connections and so forth. So they are out there, but the problem is when it comes to, all we hear about is Dr. Umar Johnson. All we hear about is, I don't know, who else? Claude Anderson or whatever. I'm not taking anything away from these guys. Some of what they say is great, but they're not out here writing no books. They're not out here, you know, going in any real depth on stuff. I don't think. It's just kind of simple surface level. Yeah, we've got to buy more black businesses and, you know, group economics and da-da-da-da. So, all right. I mean, we've done this. We've been told this already. This is nothing new and it's not very deep. Yeah. So yeah, I think I agree with you. Everything is politics on the whole. And then Osofogrio said, "Oh, you used to live in Leighton? What the hell? Lovely part of the world, Leighton. It's not, Leighton these days is a bit of a gang. The man then from like Hackney and Tottenham have started coming over and like lewing up the thing. So that's a shame. But yes, Shabaka is a visionary Pan-African musician of our times. That's what I'm finding from what I've seen so far. His bands are all great. Shabaka and the Ancestors. Comet is coming. Sons of Kemet. Their album Your Queen is a Reptile. Yeah, absolutely. I love Sons of Kemet. I'm just distraught that I've only just now discovered them because they are brilliant. Okay, cool. All right, so let's get on to the glossary now. Back to Yurugu. So in the glossary, there's a lot of terms here which I'm not going to cover all of them because she will go through most of them very soon. So I'm not going to cover the Asili, Utamawazo, and Utamarojo because she'll cover those later. The ones, there's a couple that I will just touch on because I think it's important to just for defining some of these terms. One of the terms is scientism. No, sorry, not scientism. Spirit and spirituality. I really like the way that she defined these terms because often I use the term spirit and spirituality, often not really being clear on what I mean. But Marimba Ani says this, and this is, we've got page numbers yet? No. Well, it's page 28 in the Roman numerals. I don't know. Page 14 on the PDF itself. There you go. You might maybe find it that way around. But she defines spirit as thus: the creative force which unites all phenomena. It is the source of all energy, motion, cause, and effect. As it becomes more dense, it manifests as matter. It is the meaningful level of existence. And in that throwaway small little thing there, that definition of spirit essentially explains the main chunk, one of the main chunks of her attack on European thought. Because notice there she said that as matter becomes more dense, as spirit becomes more dense, it manifests itself as matter. In other words, matter and spirit are not two separate things, or energy and spirit, if you want to call it that, are not two separate things. There's spirit, there's matter, and they're just never the twain shall meet, or spirit doesn't exist. Matter is all there is, which is materialism. And Mama Marimba Ani is saying to us that matter and spirit are one, basically. Matter is spirit in a different form. And the reason that's important is that we'll find out in a minute that the European worldview separates matter from spirit and only focuses on matter. And denies the spiritual, denies the existence of spirit, denies the importance of spirit. Thus, it disconnects itself from the knowledge and the wisdom and the experience and the truth and the reality that is spirit. Thus, i.e. ancestors. No, ancestors are nothing for them. They're just dead. And, the unborn, they're just unborn, And then the other definition she gives is spirituality. She defines spirituality thusly. She says, the apprehension of cosmic interrelationship, a perception of meaning in existence, and the degree to which one is motivated by such meaning. Spirituality is one's ability to relate to the metaphysical levels of experience. It unites thought and feeling and thereby allows for intuitive understanding. This cognitive/affective sense is transmitted through collective ancestral relationship. The absence of spirituality is an ancestral legacy. And so that's spirituality. I suppose a good question, an interesting question is, am I spiritual? Are you spiritual? I'm becoming more spiritual, but not in a weird, not in a weird necessarily way, but just I'm more open to the existence of spirit, and not even just that, but I'm more I'm starting to relate more to spirit, i.e., I am starting to become more aware of our ancestors, for one. Paul Morris said, matter is manifestation of spirit. So when we talk about origins, scientifically, we go beyond race in the modern day concept of it, but blackness is eternal. And Paul, you're getting to a conversation that we had on Facebook about blackness. Basically, I sat down and said, Paul, I'm thinking that maybe, us calling ourselves black is a problem. Maybe we don't need to call ourselves black because we're not black, are we? Like, look at us, we're brown. And also, other people are the ones who called us black. So maybe we don't need to, And Paul very helpfully took the time to kind of give me an alternative viewpoint, which is that blackness, us being black, is a symbolic reflection of the blackness of the universe. And he sent me a lot of links to lots of very interesting things getting into that, including there's a 6-part series by that scientist guy on BBC who basically goes into the origins of the stars and how the stars came out of blackness, and everything's going to go back to blackness according to Western science itself. Agrees this, let alone so yeah, that was just like, oh, it took me like a little bit of a back and forth until I was like, all right, Paul, I get you, bro. Thank you. So enough respect, Paul, for that kind of elucidation in that regards. Our blackness is much deeper than I have thought it to be, put it that way. So yeah, good. Okay, now introduction. We will go through the introduction pretty quickly because there are some things that Marimba Ani will repeat later on in the book. But the introduction starts on page 1, finally. So now we have a page number, page 1. And looking at my notes, what are the key things I want to bring out from this introduction? Yeah. Where are we? Where's the introduction? Chapter 1, core terms. Oh, I didn't put notes. All right, I've got some notes on the actual PDF. So okay, so she talks about, she echoes a lot of what John Henrik Clarke has said. So she says on page 1 that Europe's political imperialistic success can be accredited not so much to superior military might as to the weapon of culture. This is a point that is made by all Pan-Africanist scholars worth their salt. Dr. Amos Wilson in particular, long chunks of his book are all about the mind, all about the psychology of imperialism and so forth. You can look at Cress Welsing. So Paul Morris, you mentioned Cress Welsing as well, who I think we'll probably potentially do in this series as well. Cress Welsing talks about the psychological dynamics of race and racism and white supremacy and so forth. But yeah, that's a very important point. It's not just about guns, bombs, and mortar, although obviously that is important. But more importantly than that, because if the peoples of Africa all united, they wouldn't, they'd have to drop nuclear bombs on the whole continent. If they did that, they'll be killing themselves, because without Africa, there ain't no world. There's no cobalt. Simple example. All the cobalt comes from Congo. There'll be no uranium. The nuclear bombs will be, in trouble. So, Africa is everything. And not to mention the fact that if they drop bombs on Africa, then, that'll be, Europe is right, and Asia, both right next door to Africa. It will just be a cataclysm, So if we united, we would defeat them fairly easily. We'd get them out of Africa fairly easily. They couldn't militarily defeat us if we were all united. But why are we not united? It's because our minds have been trapped, and that's what Marimba Ani is gonna go into. She says that okay, yeah, she talks about the importance of studying African history, of studying Europe, the European mind and so forth. Shall I read this list of? I'm going to read this. On page 2. A bit of a roll call, but I like this roll call. She says, Chinwezu describes himself as an Occidentalist Ivor Carruthers calls for the study of quote-unquote Aryanology. These African-centered scholars have made contributions to the demystification of European thought and behavior. The African liberation movement is indebted to them. And there are others, far too many to be mentioned here, and Kobia, who are paving the way for an African-centered social theory. In the spirit of Cheikh Anta Diop and Bobby Wright, there comes Ayi Kwe-Ama, Kwame Adje Akoto, Kobe K. Cambon, aka Joseph Baldwin, Molefe Kete Asante, Ife Amadiomi, Francis Cress-Welsing, Wade Nobles, Jacob Carruthers, Amos Wilson, Naim Akbar, Kariamu Welsh Asante, Maulana Karenga, Linda James Myers, Aziza Gibson Hunter, Asa Hilliard, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Casey Anyanwu, Cedric Robinson, C. Cheloane Keto, Haki Madubuti, Abena Walker, and others. Oyeronke Oyewumi, I'd put in there. And others. Sorry, where are we? A vanguard that is codifying the language of African-centered analysis. The standards for bold African affirmation have already been set by Harriet Tubman, Nat Turner, Ida B. Wells, Anna Julia Cooper, Edward Wilmot Blyden, Marcus Garvey, Carter G. Woodson, George James, John G. Jackson, Chancellor Williams, Yusuf Ben Yochanan, John Henrik Clark, Malcolm X, and the names we cannot mention, the names we do not know, the hundreds of political prisoners and prisoners of war who have spent out their youth since the early 1970s in jail. Most of all, the intellectual tradition of African affirmation cannot be separated from the spiritual force which exists in every African person as they sing and make music and protect their families and raise their children. Yeah, let me carry on. Academia, a European misconception, has no place for us. African-centered social theory is the collective creation of every aspect of our history of struggle and victory. It began when we began, challenged by the first invaders of the motherland. It received new life from the Middle Passage. It was shaped during the crucible of the Ma'afa, and now encompasses the visions, thoughts, and creations of every African soul, every mother and father, every child. These are the names I would list. And that's just beautiful, because you know, this is who we are. This is what we're all about. We are one. We are in the middle of a huge eons long story that goes way back before this phase of our existence and will carry on way off into the future. And I like the fact that she rooted it as well into normal, regular people. So as we as normal African regular people, not famous, not necessarily scholars, not well known, are doing their normal. My wife's just gone and taken the boys out somewhere. You know, that is Pan-African. You know, she's living Pan-Africanism. She's living the life force that's prompted her to do what she's doing right now. Is the force, is the energy, is the Ntu that pervades all of us. You know, and that's what powers this book along as well. The ideas of this book. On page 3, Marimba Ani points out that, you know, people will call this book racist, and this is so important, because even in the back of my mind a little bit, I sometimes think like, what would some of my workmates think if they heard some of these things that I'm talking about? Because the funny thing is, and Marimba Ani is going to talk about this, it's almost like as soon as you start talking about white people and white culture and white whatever it might be, European culture, European ideology and so forth, it's like even inside me, somewhere deep down, like here I am, you know, safely amongst us, we can talk about these things, you know, but almost there's something in me that's like, if I was having a conversation on the phone, on the train, for example, I'd be like talking quietly, yeah, because European culture, and you know, I'd be talking quietly because I know that these people will consider this to be racist. So she says this, though, this is brilliant. She says, the critique will be called racist by Eurocentrists, but it was not developed for them. And as Aziza Gibson Hunter says, racism is the fire ignited by the Europeans. Our response is only the smoke. And though the liberals would have it otherwise, there is no way to extinguish a fire without experiencing the smoke. The Europeans have made the fire, we will put it out. And that's the thing, like but me definitely, I've got to get that thing out of my head, that sort of like that fear, that kind of looking over my shoulder, like, oh, can I talk about white people? Get that out of my head. It's good to talk about white people. It's white culture. It's good to talk about European culture. It's necessary, and let's do it. And let's, do you know what I mean? Let's not be shy. Let's not be backwards and going forwards about this. So yeah, I think that's what I'll probably the main things I'll take from the book. She does give a. Okay, no, let's talk about. Yeah, let's talk. So this is still in the introduction. So this now we're getting into the meat and drink of this. So let's do this. One of the things she's really important. She's really keen to stress is the political nature of culture. The political nature of culture. Now, in our circles, we talk about cultural nationalists and socialists, communists, whatever you might call it. As if they're two different things. Culture and politics. Culture is here, politics is here. And you can separate them. They're two different things, but they're not. And she, Marimba Ani, where are we? Yeah, here we go. She points out on page 5 and page 6. There are my notes. Good. She points out that culture is by its nature political. Why? Because culture is able to shape the personalities and behaviors of a group. So I read this here. It says, the ideological thrust of culture is inescapable. It boldly confronts us. Culture is ideological since it possesses the force and power to direct activity, to mold personalities, and to pattern behavior. So, sorry, culture is ideological because of that, first of all, but that's also why it's political. This recognition implies a theory of culture. Raymond Betts puts it this way: ideology is here used in a cultural sense to denote the verbal iconography by which a people represents itself in order to achieve communal purpose. Leonard Barrett says that ideology is the spiritual and intellectual foundation of group cohesion. Both culture and ideology are extremely political in nature, since they are about the definition of group interest, the determination of group destiny, and common goals. Cultural identification and ideological commitment, this is page 6, are bases for political consciousness. So culture is political. Because culture is not just something that's hovering there like, oh, it's culture, music, and, face, tribal markings and language, and it's just there. But this, it's not like the real stuff is all here. The politics, the machines, guns, bombs, parliaments, marching in the streets and stuff. They're all, the culture is inextricably linked to politics, because the culture basically is one of the bases for political action. And so that's why it's really important that we study culture. That's why it's really, I did cultural studies. That was my degree actually at uni. I wish I knew all this stuff back then, because I would have been much more able to justify what I was doing to others when they asked me. But yeah, she talks about how the importance of culture, the importance also of joining the dots. She says that the successful approach to the analysis and synthetic understanding of European culture demonstrates its organicity, discovers the relationships and interdependencies between its various aspects. As with any culture, we look for consistency and patterns. So it's all about synthesis, it's all about harmonizing, it's all about as she makes a point, I think she makes a point here, that it's all about making sense of what might appear to be a bewildering array of different things in European culture, because it's easy to be overwhelmed by it all. Oh, they've got all these different bodies of thought. They've got psychology, sociology, history, physics, all these compartmentalizations. And then there's you can think, damn, this is going to take me a lot. How can I understand the European worldview? Really, I can't. There's just so much to it. That she's saying, nope, No. She's going to do the work for us, and she's going to join all of the dots together for us in order to be able to make a holistic sense of it all. And it's important to make a holistic sense of it's important to look at it in a synthesized manner so that we can recognize it. You recognize its influence, recognize its impacts on the world, and attack it, destroy it, overturn it. I think there was something on page 4 that I wanted that. Yeah, here we go. So she says on page 4, she says, by emphasizing the ideological function of culture, it's important to make sense of the intimidating confusion and superficial complexity, note that superficial complexity, of the European experience. Understanding culture as ideology allows us to approach European culture in such a way as to make it a visible, extremely cohesive, and well-integrated phenomenon, in a sense more simple than we might suppose. So, yeah, that's what I like. It's, bringing it all together, looking at it systemically, looking at it, harmonizing it all, and so that we can, kind of move on from there. Now, there's a long section in the introduction which I'm going to skip because, and I might be wrong for skipping this. Correct, let me know if you think that actually I need to get back onto this, and go through it thoroughly. But Marimba Ani, goes into this defining the terms asili, asili, utamawazo, and utamaroho. And the reason I'm skipping these pages is because she starts referring to these scholars, European scholars, looking at their concepts of worldview and cultural seed and philosophical matrix and all this sort of stuff. And I just found it a little bit, I was like, okay, I'm not that interested in what all these people say, to be honest. I just want to get to what Marimba Ani's point was. So I did skip quite a lot here to a point where I think now we can talk about what is the asili, what is utamawazo, what is utamaroho. What are these terms? Well, let's quickly go to the page 16, page 16. Oh, actually, no. First, let me quickly go to the glossary. I'll read what we see in the glossary with regard to asili and utamawazo and utamaroho now. So this is on the glossary, first page of the glossary. What are these terms? These Kiswahili terms. Wagwan. Asili, which means seed. I know that in Kiswahili. Asili means seed. The logos of a culture within which its various aspects cohere. It is the developmental germ or seed of a culture. It is the cultural essence, the ideological core, the matrix of a cultural entity which must be identified in order to make sense of the collective creations of its members. So the asili is like the one that jumps out for me there. The two are the cultural essence, the ideological core, the very core foundational ideas of a culture. That's what asili means. And then as part of the asili, you have these two other things. One is utamawazo, which is culturally structured thought. It is the way in which cognition is determined by a cultural asili. It is the way in which the thought of the members of a culture must be patterned, it is the way in which the thoughts of the members of a culture must be patterned if the asili is to be fulfilled. So the asili is the cultural seed of the culture, cultural germ, ideological core of a culture. Utamawazo is the manifestation of that cultural germ, which is how people think, the ways in which people think. So in this case, European culture has this ideological core, which we're going to go into in a second. Then, as a result of that ideological core, European thought has to, Europeans have to think, and Europeans and their captives or acolytes must think in this particular way, on these particular lines, have these particular, whatever you want to call it, these particular epistemological ways of thinking and so forth, and ontological concepts, cosmological concepts. That's utamawazo, how people think within a particular culture. forms of thought, forms of thinking, ways of thinking. And then Utamaroho is the vital force of a culture, set in motion by the Asili. It is the thrust or energy source of a culture, that which gives its emotional tone and motivates the collective behavior of its members. Both the Utamawazo and the Utamaroho are born out of the Asili and in turn affirm it to the, dialectical kind of relationship or cyclical relationship. They should not be thought of as distinct from the Asili, but as its manifestations. So that's clear, actually. And then if we go back to page 16, Marimba Ani kind of puts them all together. On page 16, yes, I like this passage. In amongst all of the long conversations she has about these concepts of worldview and culture and so forth, we get this, which brings the Asili, Utamaroho, and Utamawazo together. Quote, Utamaroho does not categorize the ethos or ethoses of cultures into types but as inseparable from Asili. It focuses on the uniqueness of a particular culture with respect to its emotional rather than cognitive patterns. While the character of a culture's Utamawazo is expressed most obviously in literature, philosophy, academic discourse, and pedagogy, Utamaroho becomes more visible in behavior and aesthetic expression, whether visual, oral, or kinesthetic. Very interesting. We've just been talking about jazz and Shabaka Hutchins and the Sons of Kemet and so forth. And, it's not an accident. It's not an accident that we're talking about that sort of stuff, because jazz music is a reflection of the Utamaroho of African people. Just like all of our musical forms are, just like our dances, just like our food is, you could say, probably argue. And similarly, European art, European culture and so forth, particularly classical music, as they call it, classical music, all that sort of stuff, that reflects the Asili of the European worldview. At the same time, Utamaroho, which is the force, is the inspirational source from which the Utamawazo derives its form. For Utamawazo is not simply thought, but forms of thought. The Asili defines the Utamaroho, spirit, and gives form to the Utamawazo. The Asili, in turn, is energized by the Utamaroho, life force. Utamawazo, which is thought, Utamaroho, spirit, life, energy, and Asili, seed, influence, reinforce, and build on each other in a circular process. And in reality, that precludes their rigid distinction as cause or effect. This circular process and synthesis is culture itself. This circular process and synthesis is culture in itself. Wow. It would not be possible for one of these cultural phenomena to contradict another within the same cultural experience. By their very definition, they are supportive, compatible, reaffirming, and mutually generative. They are the interlocking pieces of one ideological system. Now, there's a lot in there, a whole lot in there, but I think I might try and share my screen to show actually, let me do that. One sec. Because if we have an image, that will be very, very helpful, because she has got some images just after the glossary to just show the relationship between these elements of culture. So can I rotate it? Yes, good. All right, where are we? Where's Asili? Here we go. Make sure you like the video, by the way. Please do like, share, press subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. And let's look at, where is it? Oh, maybe there isn't just a general image of Asili and all right, maybe not. Anyway, yeah, so there you go. So to summarize that, the Asili is the ideological core of a culture. That's what it is. The ideological, the most basic fundamental core of the culture, ideologically speaking, is Asili. Then you have two manifestations. One manifestation of that core is in the ways of thinking. And that's why you look at books, lectures, and all that sort of stuff. Poems, probably you could say. You look at particularly written things, but also just, you know, didactic pedagogy, teaching, how we teach and so forth. You know, logical stuff. The logic of a culture is that. But then you've also got the ultima rojo, which is the energy, which is the life force, which is the vim of a culture. And what a culture, you know, what powers the culture? What are the energy bases that power the culture? And the thing that I think of is, in African musical forms, what is one of the most fundamental things that you'll find basically in all? What are some of the most fundamental things that you'll find in African music forms, whether it be jazz, as I'm obsessed with right now, or reggae, which is my main music that I always go back to, dub, funk, soul, soukous, whatever you might, amapiano, all these music. What some of the key things are: polyrhythms, multiple rhythms in these things. It is the African music. It's not just one simple rhythm. You know, most of the time you have multiple rhythms going on in our music, because it's about that interweaving of different rhythms, interweavings of different cycles and patterns and whatnots. What else you could say? Yeah, polysynchronic. You know, different rhythms. Have I said that already? Different rhythms, like melodies. You know, harmonies, call and response. There you go. Call and response is one of the foundational ones. Call and response. You know, it's our music is all about call and response. You know, I said yeah. Listen what they say. Listen what they say. There's always that kind of echoing, isn't it? Back forth. Just like you see in the churches. You go to the churches. Or what's going on? Someone's talking. The pastor's preaching, and you know he's like, "Can I get an amen in here? Amen, brother. Amen, sister." You know, participation. It's not music. It's not just about, right, let me just sit here, or for that matter, lectures are not just about, let me just sit here and lecture you and tell you the deal and you shut up and be quiet. It's, no, you're part of this. This is not just a one-way thing. This is a two-way thing. This is an interaction. This is about relationship. This is about connecting with each other. And you compare that with a so-called classical concert in the European tradition. What's everybody doing? You know, quietly sitting and quietly just, you know. But if you then go and watch, I love, you know, I'm a reggae man, and particularly dancehall. You go to a dancehall concert, you know, half these dancehall concerts, live shows, I don't particularly like them, because I think it's like, I do want to actually hear these artists actually finish the songs sometimes. But I do love the way that it's almost like the audience is performing as much as the artist is performing. You know, so like they'll be like, "No, wait, push up your hand, gosso." You know, and you'll see sometimes people will walk off. Be like, "Listen, man, no, you need to let me know wagwan. We're working together in this. This isn't just I'm performing to you." You know, so some of those things I would probably argue are manifestations of the African ultima rojo, the African heart, the African life force, the untu energy, which is seeking to connect us. You know, one of the things I wrote an article about 10 years ago, speculating that this idea that, you know, black people can dance. It's true. I mean, I can't dance particularly well, but, you know, still better than the average Wazungu, probably. But this, you know, why is it that black people tend to be able to dance, or to be very, you know, what is that all about? And I proposed that potentially the reason for that is because our ultima rojo and our culture, our asili, but particularly the ultima rojo, has always been about connection, rhythm, connections of rhythms. And if you, over millennia, thousands and thousands of years, have a culture like that where drumming is central to everything, you know. Even, I mean, I should have someone, maybe I'll try and get someone one day to come and like play the drums, or, you know, do some drumming while I'm talking or something. if you've got that in your culture over many, many millennia, that music is ingrained in everything. If you watch a World Cup and you see these African teams, they're on the coach there, they're singing together. They're always singing, always, chanting, always clapping and so forth. These idiot Europeans, as we're going to see in a minute, and not all Europeans are idiots, but I'm just saying, like, the ones who do this, they'll look and say, look how primitive these Africans are. They're always dancing. They're like children. They're so simplistic. But actually, no, it's not. It's not simplistic. It's not it's not childlike. It's a manifestation of our cosmological conceptions. We are one. We are connected. We are a whole. We are unified. We're in relation to everything around us. And the dancing, perhaps, is just the fact that over millennia, obviously people are going to be dancing all the time because that's what we do. We dance. We're in tune with rhythm. We're in tune with the rhythms of nature, because all music is like it's just another form of a natural rhythm, isn't it? Music, all the different music forms. So anyway, that's just something that I'm quite interested to know if maybe Marimba Ani is going to talk a little bit about. She does mention bioculture here and there, biocultural ideas. I'm quite interested to know if she's going to go and talk a little bit about even, it is our biology, just like our biology as Black people is under capitalism and white supremacy is shaped by that. So for example, there's a lecture, there's a paper that I recommend you read called How Race Becomes Biology, where this guy, white guy, he explains how you can look at certain health issues amongst Black people, and you can understand that actually those things are not genetically based. Those things are clearly based on social economic environment. So our bodies, our very bodies, our biology is shaped by our social, economic, cultural context. And so if that's the case for our very short experience of white supremacy in the last few hundred years, what about the many, 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 many thousands of years prior to that we were living and operating in accordance with our culture, with our asilia, which is all about, rhythm and connection and so forth. So that's I like that. I like those. Well, I say I like that. Those three terms are very, very important because, again, you can start to be able to talk. What I find, even just then, what I've just done there, that's an example of how those concepts of asili and utamarojo and utamawazo do help me to be able to think more clearly about European culture and to think more clearly about culture, full stop, actually. So that's all good. Then let's get through the introduction. The only other bit, let me put the bookmarks here. The only other thing in the introduction, I wanted to bring out is so this is a point I made earlier, and I want to talk about this point again. Marimba Ani says that in European thought, they talk about European thought as if it's just thought. They talk about European history as if it's just human history. That's how they talk. It's just they universalize it all, and they've convinced the rest of us that it's universal, and they're very proud of when they're talking about their culture and they're very proud of it. Yes, Europe has been leading the world, and yes, European culture is European culture. But then look at this. When an African this is on page 19. When an African-centered critique of Europe is attempted, suddenly it becomes, if not invisible, an evasive entity of uncertain definition and demarcation. Once, when I made a comment about the European worldview, a colleague asked me to which of the many worldviews represented in the European tradition I was referring. Though he had praised the tradition consistently, now he argued that it was not uniform, nor did it represent a single reality. But European nationalism, so strong and so pervasive, is created not by diversity, but by the perception of unity. And that's an important point to end that introduction with, is that point that sometimes people will say, I've seen this a lot of times in books, people say, oh, this critique is, I think some of the criticisms of John and Beattie do this. They say, John and Beattie says that the Western time concept is linear, but there are many concepts in the Western, context of time that are not linear. So he's just, straw manning it, and that's that could be intimidating because it's like, oh God, yeah, oh no, I can't say European when I'm being critical, because they're going to ask me to define, they're going to show me all these other elements of European thought which are not on those lines. But actually, what Marimba Ani is going to show us here is that, look, forget that, move that to one side. That's the whole point of this study, is we're going to look at the unifying things, the things that unify their thought, and so that we can identify it, be conscious of it, and, you know, ultimately rid it from our minds. So that is the introduction. We're going to then go into chapter 1. We're going to do probably the first half of chapter 1 or so, because chapter 1 is 100 pages. So that, you know, I didn't have time to finish all of it. But let's jump to the comments. Again, please make sure that you subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. Do like the, do this, like the video for the algorithm, please. And also, thank you for your comments and so forth. And let's go through some of these comments. All right, where did we get to? So I think we went to here. Yeah, so Tito District, Dr. Bobby E. Wright called it menticide, the systematic destruction of a people's mind, i.e. culture. Yes, sir. I mean, yes, ma'am, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, the scary thing about that is the fact that we do it willingly. We've been convinced. It's not even like, oh, it's not a reluctant thing. It's literally like, well, I just want to be modern. I want to rid myself of all of this, as someone said here, superstition and so on. Get rid of all of that because I want to be modern. I want to be European. I want to be, you know, modern. That's the term, modern, because we think of modern as European often. Everything is politics, said. Plus, the double consciousness that we are forced to navigate on a daily basis, even amongst ourselves. Black speech is censored. Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's this constant kind of living in these two worlds, and, like, you know, as much as we are assimilated and so forth, it's still there. Do you know what I mean? Our ancestral memory, if you want to call it, is still there and won't let us go without a struggle. Won't let us completely sell out without a struggle. That's why I'm convinced that even the most sellouty of sellout black people, black person, deep down, they know, they know they get it. And, you know, try not to be, I don't want to be controversial, but, like, oh, and let me just say, the most conservative of anti-black right-wing black politicians, Kwasi Kwarteng, he knows deep down, he knows, he gets it. You can't lose yourself in whiteness because as Frantz Fanon talked about, with, look, a Negro is always there because of this skin here. They identify us just by the skin. They epidermalize us. Our identity is the skin, and it will never not be that. Maybe their children, if they, you know, their mixed children, might be able to escape. You know, what's her name? Meghan Markle type thing. You know, they, you know, pass. They might eventually be able to pass, and then they'll be part of that world. the Ryan Giggs effect, as I've heard it referred to. But you know, we know, and the struggle. We're all struggling, regardless of how sold out we kind of are. Tito District said, politics comes out of culture. I don't understand the broader left's need to separate them. Yeah, nor do I. I understand it as far as manifest, like, actual determining what things you talk about, maybe, and what issues you sort of focus on. Then maybe, you know, there's conversations to be had there about, do you want to be focusing so much on say language over political representation or something? I don't know, but they're completely connected. And then Paul Morris said, yeah, they do that. They separate that to bamboozle us. Yes, sir. Therefore, Tito District, that's why we have to develop our own independent understandings and critiques about how these structures work. That's right. And look at me. Anyway, let me maybe not go through all of these back and forth. I'll just try and pull out. Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. Paul Morris said absolutely, and this is the distinction between African thought and European thought, and our ancient civilization, based on reciprocity, and Western thought and civilization. Yes. Everything is politics. What jumps to mind, for example, is how the superstructure, i.e., Law, art, science, as explained by Karl Marx, influences the base, namely the means of production, relations of production. Yeah, of course. They're just completely, and I mean, like I said, I did cultural studies, and I'm used when I tell people, yeah, I did cultural studies, I do it like almost apologetically, like, yeah, sorry, I didn't do electronic engineering or whatever. When I went to uni, I went to University of Birmingham, and when I got there, I'd not really met that many Africans, apart from my family and a few Nigerians and stuff, like when I was growing up. There weren't that many Africans. Most black people where I lived in East London, Hackney first, then Leighton, were Jamaican, Caribbean. Then I went to uni, and suddenly all the black people I ever saw were from the continent. Pretty much all of them, or 75% of them. Oddly, a lot of them from Zambia. But yeah, Zambia, Nigerians, and a few from Zimbabwe, Kenya at one of the unis. But they were all doing these courses: electronic engineering, chemical engineering, this, that, and the other. And I felt like such an idiot, because I'm like, they'll be like, "Oh, what are you doing?" I'll be like, "Cultural studies." They're like, "Cultural studies? So what's that? What are you going to do with that then afterwards?" And I'll be like, "I don't know." But it's really interesting. I really like understanding cultures and societies and so forth. But the fact that there's a big war against so-called art subjects in the Western world, in the Anglophile world, USA, UK, tells you all you need to know. Of course, they don't want people studying culture. Of course, they don't want people studying society. They don't want you thinking about why the society is organized of course, they don't want you to do any of that stuff. They want you to just be apparatchiks. They want you to study to be a chemical engineer, and then go and work for corporations to sell your labor to these corporations to further the progress of white, aka in their minds, human progress. That's what they want you to do. They don't want you to think. And at the very least, very, very least, anyone who is going to study some of these so-called STEM hard sciences and so forth, or whatever it might be, at least make sure you're also getting your cultural education, and you're getting the basic elements of that, so that when you do graduate, you're not just going to take your skills and go off and feed your own people's destruction, but you're going to find ways to contribute to your own people's upliftment. So that's that. Primitive equals first of a kind. Yeah, that came up last week, I think. Yeah, love that. First, original, core, foundational. Yes, we are primitive. Yes, we are primitive then. Fine, I'll have that. We are a primitive people. Yes. Prime people. We are prime. We are first. We are premier. We are a premier people. There you go. Let's reposition primitive to premier. Black people are premier people, or indigenous peoples are premier people. And then this comment from Tito District. This was about the race becoming biology. Yeah, high rates of diabetes, hypertension, fibroids. Yeah, other chronic health issues, endometriosis, polycystic ovary syndrome. All these things. It's only in the last few years that I've really realized that these things are very, very endemic amongst our women in particular, and fibroids as well. Yeah, and then, so it's like you can go one of two ways. One, our bodies are weak. There's something wrong with our bodies. Or two, there's something wrong with this bloody society. Our bodies are fine. And then they move the goalposts because they don't want to be studied in the way that they study other cultures. That's right. Yeah, exactly. So it's all European. It's all rule Britannia. It's all, it's all the wonderment of white society, white culture, white thing, until you criticize them, until you want to center them and say, okay, well, actually, look at your white culture, look what it's doing to us. Then it's like, no, that's the elites, or whatever. That's only the elites. No, that's just a political thing. It's just socioeconomic. It's not cultural, Yeah, exactly. Epigenetics. That's that thing there we're talking about is indeed epigenetics. Fascinating subject as well, epigenetics. I must go into that. And then last comment before we go into the last section of the stream, where we're going to talk about chapter 1. And everyone, I mean, that's largely why a lot of continental Africans don't know their history. The parents programmed them to be doctors, engineers, lawyers, etc., following the footsteps of the colonizers. That's right. Yeah. Yes. Yes, indeed. All right. Cool. Right, let's get into the introduction. Now, the introduction, I'm going to read the introduction, just the first, cover the first kind of 20, 30 pages of the introduction, because this is where we have we're going to go into this objectification thing. So, yeah, I like this. This is really good. Marimba Ani, man, give thanks for Marimba Ani. Give thanks for this book. So this is page 29, sorry, page 29. The chapter 1 is called Utamawazo, which, as we know, is the cultural structuring of thought. And the first section is called Archaic European Epistemology, substitution of object for symbol. Fascinating. I didn't quite get this, but I'm going to read this and then, put it out there. So, the African worldview and the worldviews of other people who are not of European origin all appear to have certain themes in common. The universe to which they relate is sacred in origin, is organic, i.e. is living, and is a true cosmos. Human beings are part of the cosmos and, as such, relate intimately with other cosmic beings. Knowledge of the universe comes through relationship with it and through perception of spirit in matter. The universe is one. Spheres are joined because of a single unifying force that pervades all being. Meaningful reality issues from this force. These worldviews, or world senses, as Oyeronke or Oyewumi might call it, are reasonable but not rationalistic, complex yet lived. They tend to be expressed through a logic of metaphor and complex symbolism. That last thing there was fascinating. So all of that. Hopefully, none of that that's not going to be of news to. That's not going to be of news to anybody. That's how a lot of cultures around the world, a lot of worldviews have that view of the universe as being a living thing, an interrelated thing, a cosmic entity, meaning it's all unified, all interconnected, all arranged together. It's divine in origin or spiritual in origin. The way to perceive, the way to learn is to relate with the universe, or relate to whatever it is that we're wanting to learn, and to experience whatever it is that we're learning, and everything is connected by this force. And then I just love that that last sentence. They tend to be expressed through a logic of metaphor and complex symbolism. And I wonder why that is. Why is it that these cultures are like that? And I'm sure we'll find out as we go along. But I just found that question really interesting. That because the subtitle of the chapter is the substitution of object for symbol. So yeah. Then it carries on here. Says that. By the way, there is a question there. What practical value does that subject have? What subject do you mean, Zizo? Help. What subject? Which subject do you mean? And we'll come back to that. I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of comments there that we'll come back to. So, rob the universe of its richness, deny the significance of the symbolic, simplify phenomena until it becomes mere object, and you have a knowable quantity. Here begins and ends the European epistemological mode. What happened? How far am I going to go? Yeah, let's go. What happened within embryonic Europe that was to eventually generate such a radically different worldview? So just to say there that you've got the worldview of everyone else, cosmic universe, interrelationship, spirit, matter, spirit, connection, the same, and all that stuff. Then you've got the Europeans who are like, no, separate it all, strip down all this complexity. No, everything is linear, everything is simple to work, everything is just broken down into the tiniest little compartments in order to, consider it as a thing to be studied. That's European epistemology. How did they come to that? Well, what Marimba Ani says, what part did Platonic thought i.e. the thought of Plato, play in this process? Whether or not all of Western philosophy is, quote, but a footnote of Plato, unquote, I think that's some famous quote from somewhere. Certainly his influence on the European style of speculative thought and ultimately on the utamawazo, the general premises and assumptions of the culture, has been formative and seminal. Any discussion of the nature and origin of European epistemology must focus on, if not begin with, Plato. That is not to say that he was not influenced by the pre-Socratic African philosophies that preceded him, but what Plato seems to have done is to have laid a rigorously constructed foundation for the repudiation of the symbolic sense, the denial of a cosmic intuitive knowledge. Yeah, it is this process that we need to trace, this development in formative European thought, which was eventually to have had such a devastating effect on the non-technical aspects of their culture, i.e. of European culture. It led to the materialization of the universe as conceived by the European mind, a materialization that complemented and supported the intense psychocultural need for control of the self and others. So there we go. So that's what she's going to do. One thing that comes out from this this chapter is that Marimba Ani actually has a fair amount of respect for Plato, you know, in that kind of evil genius kind of way, because she points out that Plato was very, very consciously aiming to change Greek society. He was very consciously he was looking at Greek society of the time with disgust at certain elements of Greek society, and he really wanted to recreate Greek society, and he did, and he went about it with. I mean, one thing to point out is that Plato didn't write like many of these historical figures, like Jesus. Plato didn't write anything. Everything we know about Plato comes from his disciple. I think Aristotle might be the main person that actually claims to have written down, oh, this is what Plato said, this, Plato said that, you know. So, you know, but even with that, so that's the point. Plato was was trying to recreate Greek society. And then we read again here on page 30 again. The dialogue of the Republic is Plato's ideological justification of the state he wishes to bring into being. What we witness in the dialogue can be viewed epistemologically as the creation of the object. In previous and disparate worldviews, we see a knowing subject intimately involved in the surrounding universe. The acquisition of knowledge involved immersion in this universe until, through sympathetic participation, meaning is revealed, expressed, and understood via complex and multi-dimensional symbols. But in the new epistemology, we exchange symbols for objects, quote unquote. The creation of the object requires a transformation of the universe, no longer experienced, but rather objectified. This transformation is achieved through a changed relationship of the knower to the known. In the Republic, Plato performs this feat, a psycho-intellectual maneuver by which the subject is able to separate her or himself from the known. This separation is at once the key that opens the door to knowledge, as conceived by the Europeans, and the key that locks the door to the knowledge, to the possibilities of the apprehension of a spiritual universe. So I won't belabor the point, but what Plato is doing here, and potentially he's the first one who's doing this that we know of, he is tearing all of that up, tearing that into complex, you know, immersive, relational epistemological approach. He's tearing all of that up and saying, no, listen, first things first, you separate yourself, separate yourself, and by self he means man, Greek man, separate yourself from that which needs to be known. So you are not part of the same reality with this thing, really. You are separate from it. You can, In your mind, consider this to be an object that is not, not part of you. It's not a self. Two things occur, back to the book. Two things occur, one affecting the other. First, the psyche undergoes a transformation. Slowly, the self is perceived differently from before then. The universe to which that self relates is perceived differently because the nature of the relationship has changed. The self is no longer a cosmic being. Instead, it becomes the thinking subject. The Greek word psyche, well, I think in ancient Greek it might be pronounced psyche, but the Greek word psyche indicates an understanding of an autonomous self, distinct from everything surrounding that self. The primary focus of this self becomes the knowing and thinking of scientific activity, which is no longer connected to intuiting. According to the Platonic view, the highest endeavor is philosophy, and therefore the most valuable person is the philosopher, the lover, seeker of truth, the one who thinks best. Other functions and human activities are devalued. This new self becomes fiercely isolated from its environment. Why autonomous? Why distinct and isolated? Because this thinking being, so-called, if it is to be capable of scientific cognition, must be, most of all, above all, independent. So there's this desire to separate, this desire to pull away, this desire to remove oneself, this self, which, almost conceived of as a mind, the thinking self, remove the self from everything else. And come on, we see this, don't we? We see this in just the way that we think of the universe. We see this in the way that humans interact with the planet and so forth. We don't even think of ourselves as part of the planet. We don't think of ourselves as part of, nature. Nature is this other thing. There's nature. There's nature. Is there any nature in here? No, there's no nature in here. It's just all like metal and it's got a comb here. Metal and, this plastic thing and a t-shirt. Oh, it's not. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, this, nature is trees. That's nature. As if we're not part of this, where did this come from? It came from the same place as everything else comes from. So this burning desire to separate is what we're talking about here. And then I won't read this bit, but then she says something very interesting with regard to what was happening before. So in pre-Plato Greece, I'll just read a little bit of it. The dominant mode in pre-Platonic Greece was the poetic, exemplified by the epic of Homer's writing. The epic, of which Homer's writing is so exemplary of. But basically, she basically says that in Greece at that time, or before Plato, the epics were really important. And what they used to do, they used to tell these epics they used to perform these epics live. So Iliad is one of these epics. And by the way, I'm pretty sure there's very strong arguments that things like the Iliad, Homer's epics, were basically plagiarized from the ancient Kemites, because people like them went off and studied in Kemet. But let me read it. The success and appeal of Homer's epics depended on the identification of the audience with the characters and plot. His works were memorized and recited, and they rested on the strength of oral expression. When successfully dramatized, they evoked emotional response from an audience that felt itself to be personally involved with the subject matter. And then Plato viewed this as unsophisticated, as non-technological. He viewed it as backward, because he's like, no, don't. Why are they connecting? Why are they identifying themselves with the protagonist in these epics? No, that's foolishness. No, you need to separate yourself from these things. So to read here, the old poetic represented the habit of self-identification with the oral traditions. It represented emotional interrelationship. In other words, the success of the poetic mode rests with the ability to forge the world into a phenomenal universe, an experienced reality. Within this context, the self is dependent on its experiences. The crux of the matter for Havelock, who's this person that Marimba Ani was quoting from, and Plato, is that this dependence lodges us hopelessly in the concrete, unable to break loose from each instance, reaching beyond to an abstract statement. Havelock says that Plato was arguing for the invention of an abstract language of descriptive science to replace a concrete language of oral memory. All right, that's interesting. Then, so that was Plato's aim, and this is important because obviously, if you're so obsessed with separating yourself from everything else in order to make everything into an object to study, and I would, as we will see, to exploit, to extract what you want from them, of which the black becomes the quintessential thing to get whatever you want. What do Frank Wilderson calls, blackness fungible, which black people are fungible, which is that in the eyes of the others, we are just a whole lot of black substance to be used in whichever way you want to use it, whether it be sexual gratification or murderous, violent gratification, or whatever it might be. That's what we're here for in the minds of in this worldview. But sorry. So all these I'm looking at my notes here. So separate. Yeah, the problem is well, what then happens is that clearly, as Marimba Ani says here, clearly what this allows for is control. First, we achieve control of self. And this is the thing here. I won't read this, but I can summarize this. We don't need to read it because as well as separating the self from the universe, Plato also separated the self, or separated people. No longer were we cosmic wholes, so just like we as individuals, if we want to say, are actually part of everything else. We're connected with everything else. We can't really divide us. So also us as beings ourselves are holistic cosmic wholes. But Plato said, no, we're not. There are different elements of us. There's reason, and then there's emotion. There's the reason, and then there's the emotion parts of us. And actually, the reason is superior to the emotion. Reason is better than appetite, as Plato calls it. And this was a. I mean, I don't know if this is new per se, but the way because in reading Ra'u Nephramen, he talks about how in the ancient Kemetic understanding there was an understanding of the tree of life, and how the tree of life represented different faculties of our being, and so there were lower faculties and higher faculties. So I don't know, maybe Plato was taking some of these elements from pre-existing philosophical traditions, but it was part of this division thing. Whereas I suppose you can understand that there are different elements and faculties within us, but not necessarily pit them in opposition to one another. Plato does. Plato says, no, reason is superior to, it's a higher principle, it's a higher function, and thus must dominate emotion. And then quote here, no longer whole, we later become Descartes' mind versus body. The superiority of the intellect over the emotional self is established as spirit is separated from matter. Even the term spirit takes on a cerebral intellectualist interpretation in the Western tradition. That line there is one of those many little lines that Marimba Ani throws in there that's like, oh, we need more on that. Can I hear more on that? Maybe we'll hear more on that later. But yeah, so not only is the universe divided up, and not only is self separated from the universe, but even within ourselves, reason is separated from emotion, and it must dominate. And similarly, this is what they do. This is what then starts to happen with all the other elements of existence. Everything is dichotomized. So if we go to, where we go? Where should we go? Let's go to page 33. Yeah. Whereas other worldviews have complementarity. So you can have, yes, there's male, female, but it's complementarity. All of the elements, and as Marimba Ani said, this understanding of like the duality that exists in all things. You know, it's a duality of complementing. But for Plato, it was not about complementarity. It was about domination. It was about opposition. So we read on page 30, where should we go? 34. Well, anyway, it's kind of interspersed with throughout the whole chapter, but that's the whole thing, is that everything is set in opposition to each other. So yeah, so that's what happens. Everything is set in opposition to each other. Then Marimba Ani asks an interesting question here. Again, coming back to what's the roots of all of this? Marimba Ani says, when does it become necessary to perceive pairs as being in polar opposition and exclusive rather than being complementary and diunital? This may be the point of origin of the European consciousness. And then Marimba Ani says this: I suspect that the need occurs at a much earlier period in the archaic European experience. Classical Greek was merely an important phase of standardization. It had inherited a particular asili, i.e., ideological core, already carrying the cultural genes. And then we have some conversation here about how the shift from polarity to hierarchy corresponded to a shift from the democratic city of the 5th century, democratic for men only, just always remember that, to a period in the 4th century, BCE, this is, of questioning the polis as a form. So that's what we have, splitting everything up, and there must be domination. There must be domination. You can't just. So one thing I always think of is that, you know, when these Europeans turned up on the shores of Africa and so forth, and particularly North America, you know, the locals would be like, oh, hello, you know, here's some food, you know, come and sit down because it's a visitor, you know. Whereas in the minds of the conquistadors and the rest of them, they're like, we're going to kill the living daylights out of these people and take their stuff. You know, that's all they knew. They didn't know, you know, imagine if, you know, imagine a world where you do have a period, people who go and travel around the world, and when they meet people, they're like, oh, let's learn, let's grow, let's share, let's love, let's, you know, and then go, you know, that's what people say, for example, that's what people argue that happened in ancient Kemet. Wasir is supposed to be someone who went off and traveled around Asia and India and all these places, kind of teaching them wisdom and truth. But yeah, these European, that's what I think of when I think about this need to dominate. I think of the colonial and you know, the new world discovery, where they're like, yeah, we're gonna have to destroy all of you. While the locals are like, you know, eventually they probably obviously worked it out, but initially they'd have been like, oh, wonderful, look, new people to experience with and learn from. And anyway, so then the last bit that I'm going to talk about now is harmony. Yeah, last bit of this live stream, we're going to talk about harmony, and I'm going to read this section because I think it's important. This is on page 35. Make sure you like the video, by the way. I see, people coming in. Do like. First thing to do, like the video just for the algorithm and stuff, you know. And again, sign up at eliwananda.substack.com for email list, please, because then we can keep in touch more directly afterwards. And you get access to all of the live streams in their entirety. The ones that stay on YouTube, usually they're only kind of portions of the live streams. So yeah, harmony. Marimba Ani argues that this worldview cannot give us really an authentic idea of harmony, which makes sense because it's all about division, and hierarchy. So Marimba Ani says harmony is mistakenly projected as a rational order, an order based on the mechanism of control. What Plato recognizes as harmony is achieved when the positive term of the dichotomy controls or destroys the negative term phenomenon entity, when reason controls emotion, both in the person and in the state. So, sorry, one thing I forgot to say was that the idea that Plato was pushing was that people of reason, people in whom emotion had been dominated and controlled by reason, are the ones who should also run the society. And then obviously we know that this is only men who were running that society in Greece. That's just how it was. Women were not seen as women were seen as emotional creatures. You know, they couldn't be rational, reasonable creatures. So they were dominated by their bodies, dominated by their bellies, dominated by nature, which is terrible for Plato and Platonic thought. It's terrible to be influenced or in any way by nature. You know, you've got to control nature and dominate nature. And so the idea, what you see is that there's the germ of the social political order, which is where you posit that some people are superior and they're the ones who are going to dominate the rest. You know, and we see it as Marimba Ani mentions about the whole IQ thing, where these people say, oh, black people have lower IQ, so they must be dominated and controlled, you know, because they don't have the intellect. The seeds of that are kind of coming from this Plato and his dichotomization and objectification of everything. In the African and Eastern conceptions, harmony is achieved through the balance of complementary forces. Okay, yeah, we've said that already. A theory of the universe, a theory of the state, and a theory of human nature is implied in Platonic epistemology. Justice, or the good, is achieved when the best controls the worst. The universe is ordered through such control. In the state, the highest control the lowest. The person is constantly at war within himself and is not properly human until his reason controls his emotion, etc. And then, this is where she talks about how you can see where the roots of race science, gender as an ideology, Western gender as an ideology, all these things come down to this concept of binaries, of dichotomization, of hierarchicalizing, you know, and dominating. And of course, the self has to dominate the universe, you know. Until a person's reason controls. What was I going to say? There was something I was going to say. I can't remember what I was going to say now. But check my notes quickly. Yeah, I can't see my notes. Yeah, so that's sort of the roots of what we're going to see in the rest of in human history forthcoming, isn't it? And then on page 36, and I will just quickly talk about devaluation of the senses as well. So page 36 at the bottom, she talks about how at the level of epistemology, we have seen that this splitting of the human being facilitates the achievement of that supreme mental state of being that in European culture has come to be identified with the ability to think, or at least to think rationally. Unless the intellect is separated from the emotions, it is not possible to talk about them distinctly, to concentrate on gaining knowledge by controlling or eliminating the emotional relationship into a given situation, thing, or person. And isn't that so true that, you know, this idea of, you're just being emotional now, you're being emotional, you're just being emotional. You know, don't be led by you. And I get that. I do agree. I get that you know, there is a danger in being led by your emotion. Because what are emotions? Emotions is if you break it down, emotions are just physical energies. That's what emotions are. So there's a guy called, I've mentioned him before, Antonio Damasio, I think his name is. And he wrote a book called The Error of Descartes. I haven't read the book, but I've listened to a couple of lectures from him. And he talks about how he sort of demystifies the concept of emotions. What he says is emotions are the physical feeling, physical. What's the word? A physical reality that is felt in the body. That's the emotion. That's what emotion is. And then our feelings are how we interpret it in our minds, in our brains, if you want to say that. And obviously, anyway, let me read the rest of the book, the next little bit of the book, because she breaks it down. But basically, the point is that if you're shutting yourself off from receiving anything from your from your emotions, from your body, that is, from your senses, then you're shutting yourself off from so much. You're shutting yourself off from so much that there is there to be learned and to be experienced. And this is the point that Marimba Ani makes in these next couple of pages here. And we will be finishing after. We're going to get up to page 30. Sorry, page 4, probably page 39 or 40. But I want to touch on this last bit because this is about the devaluation of the senses. Let me just have a look here. There's a lot in here, but let me see. All right, yeah, let me read this. In the establishment of this new epistemological mode, Plato used his imagination. He created a reality. Hypothesis became theory. He demonstrated brilliance, perception, and vision. That's what I'm saying. Like, Marimba Ani's got a lot of respect for this dude. He must have known what he wanted the future to look like, taking into consideration the political and ideological needs of the society. But when theory that originates in imagination becomes more than a useful epistemological tool for specific tasks associated with scientific investigation, it can become dangerous because it can indeed obfuscate the reality it is attempting to clarify and distort the cognition that it is attempting to perfect. And a point she's making there, it's a very subtle point. Like a lot of the points that Marimba Ani makes here are very subtle. She's not just trying to say, listen, all this dualistic thinking or whatever is terrible and we need to just get rid of it. She's saying, listen, this may and is of use in certain contexts of scientific endeavor, for example. It's important to be able to separate yourself from a thing and to, do you know what I mean? Step back and probably look dispassionately at something and so forth. Sometimes that is necessary. That is important. It's important sometimes to have a rationalistic approach, but only in those kind of contexts. The problem is now this approach, dichotomizing, objectifying, and so forth, has gone and been applied to everything. And that's where the problem comes. You distort, you cause suffering, and like she says here, it distorts cognition. Plato's theory of knowledge eventually became reified, which means, almost considered to be a real thing in itself. Reified into an ideological statement with political implications. His creation was to become a determinant and support, a foundation and an inspiration for the dominance, intensification, and valorization of one tendency in European behavior to the detriment of other inclinations. And again, there's that idea there that not all of European thought, well, I mean, it's clear, European thought before, even Greek thought before Plato wasn't like this, but that would have been one tendency amongst many. But it was elevated and used to smash all the other ones over time, which is amazing when you think about it. Because it's kind of, this is why it's important when some of these like ideological discussions that are taking place that you find online, it can be easy to be like, what are they talking about? Jordan Peterson is one that pops to mind. Jordan Peterson, Stefan Molyneux. What are they on about? These quacks, these alt-right idiots. Yeah, just ignore them. You could ignore them, but the thing is, those ideas will build, they will develop, they'll grow, and then they'll eventually start to impose themselves on society. The right, funnily enough, the right say that about the left all the time. The right say that, cultural Marxism. They talk about the cultural Marxism, as they call it, which is basically critical theory. And they recognize that critical theory started in the 30s and was aimed at critiquing Western society and eventually like transforming Western society. And, over time, they call it the long march through the institutions, where eventually these ideas become the norm, the dominant forms of thinking and whatnots in society. And this is what we're seeing. What must have happened here with regard to Plato is that initially probably just like a fringe idea, which then eventually went on to define Greek and subsequently European thought. The need to control and to have power over others ascended to a position of priority. It became an obsession, always struggling to negate whatever humanism existed in the culture because of the asili. Yeah, let me read this. The universe presents itself naturally as a cosmos, as subject to which we are linked as subjects. Ancient African cultures viewed the world so, and early Greeks inherited this view. According to, and then the Homer thing, Homer in his epics. And I won't read this because the whole point is that, in these other cultures, in African culture and other cultures, the cosmos the universe was a cosmos, and it was all about relating with it and engaging with it and so forth. Plato wanted to change all that. He was proposing a revolution in thought. The revolution was necessary in order to satisfy the European utamaroho. Perhaps he should have said, let us pretend that the universe is not subject, but object, that we are not part of it, but separated from it. Let us do this solely for the purpose of experimentation in order to see what implications such a concept might have. But he didn't say, let's pretend. Rather, he said authoritatively that in order to know, we must be dealing with objects. The way that we create objects is by totally detaching ourselves from what we wish to know, etc., etc., etc. One of the things that makes me think of is animal testing. Animal testing, there's a lot of opposition to animal testing, when they test products on animals. Let's put, half of these scientific breakthroughs come about as a result of experimenting on animals. You have to detach yourself from an animal in order to experiment on it. You have to. There is justification, some sort of justification. I think, I'm not a vegan, and I think that, eating meat is, is something that is in harmony with the nature of existence as we see it. Experimenting animal experiments on animals, not so much, in my opinion. You have to, how can you sit there and do these experiments on these rats and hear them squealing and screaming and so forth, and you're torturing them over months and months? You can't do that unless you detach yourself completely from them and unless you objectify them. And similarly, the way that the Europeans and others treated our ancestors, the way that they chained them up, shackled them up in these ships, and the way that they've just been treating our people over the last several hundred years, of course you have to objectify us. Of course you have to dehumanize us. Of course we have to not be human, or at least right on the cusp of humanity, because even the most diseased-minded person is not going to happily torture somebody who they consider to be akin to. You have to do that. And then yes, I think, let's have a look. I think we're pretty much there. I think, yeah, we'll probably stop there. Yeah, let's stop there. Let's stop there for the reading there. But I think that's kind of laid the main foundations and made a very, very important point with regard to this objectification and this dichotomization. It plays out in so many different areas of life, and yeah, I think I think that's a good foundation that we've built now in these 2.5 hours. Goodness me, we've been going for a while. It's a good foundation we've laid now for the rest of the streams next week. So what I want to do before we go through the last comments there, I just want to encourage each and every single one of you to like the video if you haven't already liked it, and also just go to the next week's live stream, which is where is it? Oh, yeah, next week's live stream is, I'm going to share a link to it in the comments in a second. Boom. Just go there if you would, please, and like that video, please, and click notify me so that you'll be notified. It's going to be next Saturday again because I'm busy on Sunday, so we're going to do it next Saturday. And yeah, we'll look forward to that. We'll look forward to that one. Let's go through some of these comments here. Yeah, well, I'll start from the bottom and work upwards. Animal trophy hunting, exactly. Great example. Great example of what is this? It's just, I mean, and it's, we do need to unpack some of this stuff. We do need to unpack some of these things because our relationship to animals is a very fascinating topic for me, just because of the whole relationship with regard to food, and what I mean, and animals are killing animals and for food, and so are we. And I'm so looking forward to at some point someone will hopefully share a book or something that gets into those things, and we can kind of go into those. But you certainly see this. I mean, battery farming. Would you have got battery farming? Would Africans have developed battery farming? Probably not. Industrialized battery farming. Probably not. I just couldn't see it. I couldn't see it. Even the animal rearing and so forth in an agricultural setting is miles and miles away from the industrial thing. A lot of the time, some of these people groups who keep animals, they view those animals as almost like part of their family, and they view them as sacred, like what they call them. There's a lot of people, but in Uganda there's people called the Karamojong who are nomadic peoples, and there's another people. What are the ones I can't remember what they're called, but there's a few of them, and they're like cows for them are like they're very, 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 very sacred to them, even as much as they eat beef. Then to good, nice, interesting comment there. Then coming back to actually, let's go back to okay. So what DeSantis is doing in Florida, just another example of this growing trend. Yeah. Oh, sorry, this is a follow-on from your other comment. In the US, the right has been slowly consolidating power from the local to national level. That's right. They have to be taken seriously because they are now changing curriculum and policy. Absolutely, that's the thing. But politics. Grassroots local politics or whatever is boring, and boring in the sense of you don't really see many news reports about that sort of stuff. You don't see news reports about local organizing. But that you're absolutely right, Tito District. I know of that. I think similar things happen here. One of the things that's happened here in the UK as well is that they've absolutely decimated local news. So when I was young, you used to get local newspapers put through our door every day. Was it Wolf and Forest Guardian? I think it was called. Yeah. When I was in Hackney, it was Hackney Gazette every week. Full of stories about, okay, this is happening in the council, that's happening at the local authority, this is happening here, this issue has been is happening. These people are campaigning about this. They massively, completely destroyed local news now, so that there aren't really many local newspapers, and the ones that exist you have to pay for, which means that there's no scrutiny of local politics, really. So like, I hear stories about, you go to these like public hearings and there's hardly anybody there because no one knows about it. And so these things are brought in, these decisions are made without people's knowledge and without people's awareness. And also they another, like you're saying there, another way it manifests is that certain like Brexit was a perfect example of this, because 20 years prior to Brexit, these people were quietly infiltrating political parties, local political party branches, feeding in their ideas, starting to dominate the agenda. Then you had these what they called lobby groups who would all funded by shady big capitalists, big elites and stuff. But they'd go Institute of Economic Affairs, Center for Policy Studies, Taxpayers Alliance. All these groups, they're all funded by the same people, and they're all doing the same thing, fighting for so-called small state, fighting to cut public services, strip out any control over economic, finance and all that sort of stuff. And leaving, basically transferring wealth from the bottom upwards. That's what they're doing. And so that's the thing to just, Plato, you can look at Plato as being like a primordial example of this process. And I'm sure maybe if we went deep into Greek history, we'll probably see like how the Platoists or whatever they were called started to go and infiltrate the Greek political system and all this sort of stuff. You know, it's quite fascinating to think about it in that way. But yes, let me go back up to the top because I was going backwards, but that's a silly way of doing it. Right. Everything is politics. In their school of thought, everything becomes binaristic, oppositional, which makes way for dominating, subduing parts. Absolutely. Unfortunately, Islam was also influenced by ancient Greek, which can explain their relations with African indigenes. Yeah, true. Then you've got things like chapter 2 is about religion, I believe. So we'll get into that into more detail. But then you've got things like Zoroastrianism, which Zoroastrianism was an influence on both Christianity and Islam. It's a Persian religion, basically. And they had like a super, super strict dualistic worldview. Everything was good or evil. The universe is basically split between good and evil. And you see that when you look at Christianity, when you look at even the New Testament, you compare the New Testament to the so-called Old Testament, and you see quite a radical shift in the concepts that were being discussed. Whereas the so-called the Tanakh, the Torah and the writings, whereas that book is quite localized, quite sort of parochial, you could say, very, very interesting and very, you know, minuscule details about exactly how people live their lives and so forth. And, you know, there's not really that much in the Old Testament with regard to these like highfalutin concepts and theories and whatnot. Then suddenly, 400 years after, is it Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament? 400 years later, you open up the New Testament, and particularly the letters of Paul, and then you've got all this like, whoa, spirit, soul, spirit, body, the spirit has to dominate the flesh is weak. It's like, whoa. You know, so yeah, this Platonic influence probably is, you know, we're going to find out is very, 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 you know, very, very big. Zizo, I'll skip your dualism and non-dualism comment because I think you gave another one at the bottom. Yeah, I'll come back to it. Everything is Politics says this explains why the role of psychiatry, Western psychotherapy, plays in regulating emotions via reason, despite the material conditions that cause people suffering. Yeah, largely influences said suffering. Yeah. Chemical balances mustn't be minimized. Well, let me not get down that rabbit hole, but I don't know if they've actually proven chemical imbalances are a cause of anything, actually. Check out, there's a group called Mad in America. And I've been following them for a few years, but they're interesting to follow because they feel that all of the main precepts of psychotherapy are false with regard to the causes of mental illness. And the reason I do recommend you check them out, Mad in America, because their approach, I think, is much more in keeping with what you might call an African cosmological approach, because they're like, well, yeah, you're suffering because of the society that you live in. And by just saying, oh, here you go, take a pill, you've got a chemical imbalance, take this pill, you're not providing any meaning to that suffering. You're not, do you know what I mean? You're not getting into the roots of that suffering, and thus you're not, you're not what's the word? You're not really helping people by doing that. All right, then we go down to Zizo. All right, so Zizo, here you go. Let's end with this big comment here. Zizo said that, where are we? Dualism and non-dualism is debated well in Indian Tantra. Then he said, Tantra is the study of the universe through the interwoven lens of female and male interaction. The English had to conflate it with the Kama Sutra and sex, as it did not fit into their worldview. Yeah, absolutely. Tantra. I hear Tantra. I'm like, ooh, it's going to be something about sex. Farming. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I don't know much about Tantra. I don't know much about that whole kind of area of philosophy and thought and so forth. But okay, good to know. I'll keep that on the radar. And then your last comment here, Zizo, is farming, isolating a species of a plant to grow on its own in desert-like fields and then needing to support it with chemicals. Yeah. I've heard it said that agriculture, the rise of agriculture, actually has been quite a destructive force in the world. Because I mean, isolating a species of plant to grow on its own, that whole thing. Here in England, like when I first moved here where I live now, I was like, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. And it's a lot closer to what I'd consider beautiful than Leighton, in London. But it's also so much greenery. Yeah, look at those rolling fields. English people, like, they love to boast about, the rolling green and pleasant land of ours and so forth. There's some truth in that. But those rolling fields are monocultures. Those rolling, they are deserts. Yeah, they're fields that have been completely stripped of their diversity, biodiversity, if you want to call it that, completely stripped of, wild animals, wild insects, the diversity of insects and animals, all stripped away completely. Why? Because agriculture determined, and particularly industrialized agriculture determines that no, we have to rationalize this area. This whole area is of no use to us because I can't grow corn here. How can I grow corn here? I can't grow, avocados here. No, I can't, with all these trees here and that there and all this chaos and disorganization and whatnots. So let's instead turn it into a monocultural thing. So that's again a subject I'm quite fascinated about. I think that whole area actually of I can't remember, there's someone we were talking to before, but that whole area of our relationship with the world, what's the word? Our relationship with our lived environment, our physical environment. I absolutely I think that's one of the growth areas for Pan-Africanists, actually, because why? Because there's just a lot of destruction that's happening to this world that we live in because of our unquestioning acceptance of these forms of providing food for ourselves, this unquestioning acceptance of farming, agriculture, this unquestioning acceptance of all of those things, and this alongside that, this denigration of nomadic living, this denigration of I don't know, hunter-gatherer things and so forth. And I'm not saying we all need to go and become hunter-gatherers. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that we at least need to be turn a critical eye to this. Where are we getting our food? Where does our food come from, actually? And are we happy that this is where our food comes from? And also, are we aware of the destruction that's being wrought as a result of this? Whether it be like the soil, the erosion, soil erosion, because all the trees are being chopped down and so on and so forth, and the nutrients are being depleted. So there's a lot there, man. And then Ziza, like you said there, this chemical fertilization thing. So one of the things as well that I didn't realize till I moved around here was that you see these like streams and rivers, and you might think, oh, I must go in there and let me go jump in. These white folks here, they like to go and do skinny dipping, and like there's always these notices and warnings saying, listen, don't do it, because these rivers, they don't say this, but I know that these rivers and these streams and ponds, even in a place that might look so pristine and so green, are littered with pesticides. Because where do all those pesticides go? They don't evaporate. They have to go somewhere. So they spray the pesticides on in massive quantities, and they eventually have to go and end up in our water supply. So don't swim in the water, man. And then Zizo, thank you. The summary: agriculture as a mistake in our history, monocultures. That's it. Thanks. That is all. I will not be taking questions. You should have said. And then last comment here, Tito District. That's why there's been a rise in permaculture and agroecology, trying to return to a more biodiverse way of living and eating. Yeah, absolutely. There's a brother called Ajamu Nangwaya. Tito, you've probably heard of him, but Ajamu Nangwaya, he's a Jamaican Canadian brother who is now living in Jamaica, and he's always posting, he'll post like photos of him like getting some green banana or whatever from the tree and like tending the thing, and there's all these like, and the thing as well with that is, how can I put this? Am I ready? Yeah, I think I can say that. So when he's posting those comments, when he's posting those photos of him tending to his green banana or his sweet potato or whatever, or, with all these little things, there's wisdom in that. There is wisdom in that. There is wisdom in the act of being direct with the food, being direct with your, with your plants and herbs and stuff like that. There's wisdom in that. There's what's the word? Yeah, we are missing out on a huge amount of wisdom because of our complete detachment from the actual land that we live in. I mean, I barely physically touch soil or even, anything. I barely touch any of that. In an average day, this is where I work in the daytime. I could sit here, wake up in the morning, come here, I might drop the boys to school, like jump in the car, pollute up the air because it's only, it's only around the corner, but it's, then come back and then sit in this room for several hours, then go and get them again, come back, sit down, eat. I might not even touch a tree or grass. I've got a garden here with grass. I might even go out into my monocultural ugly lawn there, let alone actually experience and enjoy it and engage with, our relatives that are the trees, that are the plants, that are the planets, that are the stars and so forth and so on. So yeah, it really does make me think. Really does make me think. Yeah, check him out, Ajami Nangwaya. Permaculture, definitely. Hopefully we'll get a book or something that we can do as part of these we are reading. But on that note, that has been a good first session. I think that's been a good conversation. Next week on Saturday the 25th, again, do like that. Do head over to that video and like it there. I think when you finish this one, actually, it will direct you as soon as I finish here. It will direct you to the next one as well. So do that as well. But yeah, thanks. Hopefully this has been a good starter to this conversation. What's happening here? How do I edit here? All right. And yeah, thank you for all your comments. Thanks for your input and insights. It's been a really again really enjoyable conversation. Next week, as I say, we'll get into chapter 1 into a little bit more detail, and hopefully I'll have my physical copy by then, so I won't have to be only looking at the screen all the time. Save my eyes a little bit. So next week, yeah, we'll get into the rest of chapter 1, which is there's going to be a section on the new dominant mode, theory of humanness, lineality and cause. So that's good. The concept of time, that's going to be a big section. The supremacy of the absolute, abstract and analytical, the desacralization of nature, despiritualization of the human. And then there's a section on alternative models and the character of the European Utamawazo. So yeah, lots to get into next week. It's going to be good. Yeah, it's going to be big. For shizzle. So yeah, thank you everybody. Thank you guys. That's this huge bro. So plants are supposed to reflect us and their environment. A disease rises and is resolved through nature. Coming back to that for sure. Oh, there's another guy I want to just mention as well. His name is what's his name? Bio. I think it's Bako. Hang on a sec. I need to. Is it Bio? Yeah, Bio Akomolafe. He's a guy who is I mean, you could tell he's a Yoruba, but check this guy out because he talks in ways with regard to like nature and disease and so forth that I just find so. When he was talking about the I'm going to stop, but he was talking about the corona, the SARS-CoV, and he talked about it in a way I'd never heard anyone talk about it. Basically saying that, look, listen, this is an entity, and we need to understand this entity. It's not just an enemy. It's not just a thing. It's an entity. It's a living thing. to try and understand it and maybe understand what its motives are and so forth. Deep, I know, but just want to throw it out there anyway. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Tito District. This is going to be a great series on Yurugu. I agree, 100% agree. Everything is politics. Another brilliant segment. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, so vast with us. It's not, but thank you. I have some, but I'm a water carrier. I've got a pot here. I go to Oyeronke or Oyewumi, here, fill up my pot. Thank you. I'm just quite good at carrying the water over and sharing it with others. That's how I see myself. I'm a conduit mainly. Zizo, thank you for chiming in as well. And yeah, thanks guys. Thank you, Paul Morris. Enough respect, my beloved. Peace and blessings to each of you. Have a wonderful rest of the day, yeah? And I'll see you next Saturday, the 25th. All right. Salama. Peace.